Ooh, hey, are we live? Are we live? How's it going, everybody? I apologize for that. I hope everyone can hear me. Of course, technical difficulties. It is just me, I guess, refusing to replace my setup, much akin to the RV in Breaking Bad during that great scene when Jesse and Walt are talking in the episode entitled Gliding Overall, where they said, why didn't we replace it? And Walt's answer was inertia, so maybe that's my excuse too. But anyway, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but that's neither here nor there. We are now here, and I am very, very excited to once again talk about Breaking Bad in this Season 2 retrospective, as I'm now calling it. What is up, everybody? Right off the bat, at Kate Valentine, thank you so much for the super chat. Hey, Anton, enter Saul, let's dance. Oh, man. Yeah, this is, oh my goodness. Thank you so much for the super chat, Kate Valentine, all the support you given to this channel really means a lot. And it's actually so funny when I was rewatching this episode. I just found myself thinking, oh my goodness, there's so much here with the benefit of hindsight. There is so much, especially due to the fact that because of the episode Better Call Saul, because of the episode Breaking Bad in season 6 of Better Call Saul, adding so much more backstory and depth and perspective to this episode. I was just thinking there's so many different components to take in when breaking down this episode and looking back on it after all of these years. And I was actually kind of thinking where I'm going to sort of, I guess, start, if you will, and also sort of how much of the Better Call Saul season 6 story that was interjected into the backstory of this episode with the benefit of hindsight I'm also going to incorporate here. But yeah, I'm really, really excited to talk about this episode. So much here. And as I was rewatching this episode, this really is, this is really when the stories truly come together. I mean, it's pretty obvious when you have the main protagonist of Better Call Saul being introduced into the plot of Breaking Bad in this episode. There's really no bones about it here, how the story just becomes completely intertwined at this point in time, and I just absolutely can't wait to talk about this episode through and through. There's so much here. There's so much to discuss, and yeah, I will definitely get right into it. But yes, I apologize for starting late. What is up at Handrock? Chris Cineros, what is up? At T, how's it going? Stone Yoda, Eddie, Smokeless Choice, how's it going? Jason West, another amazing episode. I agree. At Stu Lerner, I appreciate everyone for tuning in. But yeah, so I guess I'm going to just basically tackle this episode like I tackled all the other previous episodes and sort of just tackle it in a linear trajectory. And also, I'm definitely going, I mean, it's unavoidable to not talk about and incorporate the additional story from this very episode that was also told to us in season 6 of Better Call Saul. It's unavoidable. It's impossible to watch this episode without that specific perspective, in my humble opinion. And yes, I keep saying without further delay, let's get into it. But truly without further delay, after I take a drink of water, let's get right into it and talk about this unbelievable episode. So yeah, right off the bat here, something I definitely noticed when I was rewatching this episode is that compared to other episodes this season, such as Peekaboo or well, specifically Peekaboo, which was such a dark, immensely intense, emotionally intense episode, it's so nice to sort of contrast an episode like that to an episode like this, which is so much more lighthearted in nature compared to some of the increasingly dark storylines that we've seen over the course of season 2 of Breaking Bad, and we will continue to see. Spoiler alert, with everything that's going to happen with Jesse and Jane in the episodes to come. It really sort of is the contrasting, for lack of a better example, the yin to the yang. I apologize if I'm culturally appropriating that, but it really sort of exemplifies all the unbelievable comedic aspects of Breaking Bad, which are just as much a component of the story as the incredibly dark, emotional, just overarching drama that is this television series. I mean, just starting out here with the cold opening scene, it's just absolutely hilarious to see the back and forth between Badger and this undercover police officer played by the actor DJ Qualls, who, my goodness gracious, this guy looks super young. Before I get into that, at Paul Sura, thank you so much for the super chat. Let the games begin. In a weird way, Badger's poor choices in dealing drugs changed a lot of people's lives. Smash the thumbs up. I really appreciate all the support, Paul Sir, and I definitely appreciate you promoting my channel and much better than I do. But yeah, definitely a real butterfly effect, I would say, where sort of as I'm about to get into it right here in this cold opening scene of this unbelievable episode, Badger's decision here for sure, his sort of very lightheartedness, as you said prior to the stream, and his poor choices here changed a lot of people's lives. It really sort of is the catalyst, the straw that broke the camel's back. It really is the sort of supernova, if that's the right thing. I don't know anything about science, but yes, I mean this was the moments where these worlds just inevitably collided at Pulsura, of course. And while I talked about it in some of my previous, I guess, retrospectives of season 2 of Breaking Bad, while characters like Gus and Saul and the cartel were forever lurking in the background, unbeknownst to the knowledge of the main and supporting protagonists Walter White and Jesse Pinkman, this was the event. This was the Big Bang, if you will. It's sort of a great sort of thing you pointed out there, Paul Sir. This really was the event, which was the explosion, which truly made these worlds collide, where Walter White was forever in the game. I mean, not that he wasn't already in the game, but it's really when, as you said, it changed a lot of people's lives. It was the direct event by which Saul Goodman met up with Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. Of course, just based on our knowledge of the story of Breaking Bad, we knew eventually, because of the nature of sangre por sangre with the cartel and the Salamancas, that meeting would happen no matter what Walter White did. Walter White was going to meet the end of the Salamanca cousins' acts no matter what, just based on the sort of unwritten raison d'etre of the cartel. Maybe it is written, who knows? But yes, absolutely. This is when I like that sort of expression. Let the games begin. Absolutely. This is really when the worlds collide. For sure, through and through. But yeah, as I was saying in this episode here, a lot of the comedic aspects of this series fully exemplified in this episode. I mean, it's one of my favorites. It's an episode I've seen again and again. Unlike the episode Peekaboo, which I've only seen maybe less than a handful of times. That's not the sort of episode you want to rewatch again and again. But this one is definitely This is definitely an episode which I found myself rewatching over and over again, even prior to me watching it again for the who knows how many of times prior to this review. But yes, we see the undercover police officer played by DJ Qualls here, and my goodness gracious, does this guy look young. I mean, the casting here is just absolutely impeccable. People tell me I look pretty young, that's for sure. I guess maybe I missed my calling. I could have been an undercover cop who goes into high schools, as Lydia Redart Quayle said to Jesse Pinkman in the episode entitled Dead Freight. At T, thank you so much for the super chat, man. I really appreciate the support. Amazing episode. Was the birth of not only Saul, but Lalo and Nacho as well. Thank you for the content. Loving the Breaking Bad retrospective. I really appreciate the support, at T. And yes, as Paul Sura said, and as a lot of people said, this absolutely was the sort of, it was the Big Bang. It was the supernova. It was the event that sort of spawned the forever linking of the world, the sort of at the time which the audience thought was a completely separate entity in Walter White and Jesse Pinkman's methamphetamine venture, forever linking it with the cartel and the Gus Fring, the Salamancas. Again, I'm sort of stumbling over my words here because I'm sort of thinking about how people are sort of talking about my speaking style, and it's definitely something that is coming into my head right now about the crutch words that I use in order to help me speak so fast to fill in the gaps of the silence, if you will. I definitely say and sort of a lot, and I'm definitely sort of stumbling over my words. I think I did it again. It's a definite crutch that I use that helps me talk so fast and helps me formulate my thoughts as quickly as I do during these reviews. And I don't know. I was trying to correct myself here, but who cares? I think I'm going to just speak in the same style that I'm used to speaking in. It is what it is. But yes, I agree completely. It is absolutely the birth of the Breaking Bad universe takes place in this episode, T. I would definitely say that that's a great way to sum it up. And it's definitely something I was thinking about as I was rewatching this episode, of course. And I do appreciate the kind words. I am loving I'm loving doing these retrospectives, if you will. I love talking about this show. It never gets old. I could talk about this show forever and ever and ever. And I will continue to do it right here and right now. But yes, as I was saying, I definitely missed my calling. I should have been an undercover cop, as Lydia Redart-Quayle said. Someone told me I looked 15 the other day, but that is a discussion for a completely other time. But yes, without trying to get bogged down in every single specific detail, and trying to get into the meat and potato story right here, it definitely is pretty hilarious, in my opinion, how Badger's initial instincts are absolutely correct. He can sense it immediately when this man sits down next to him, when he says, "I don't know what you're talking about," when he said that he was trying to buy, immediately could see that this was an undercover cop and this was a sting operation, pointing out the vans, pointing out how he clearly, quote unquote, smelled bacon, saying that this person was clearly an undercover cop. But despite all of this, maybe it's due to Badger's, I guess, for lack of a better word, lack of intelligence here. That's a very sort of condescending thing to say. Badger definitely has, a lot of street smarts here, but definitely should have given into his initial instincts here and not sold to this undercover police officer right here and right now. But of course, it is kind of funny when the police officer initially backs away. Badger's almost in a quasi manner toying with him, if you will, sort of poking fun at him, even saying, "You guys give up that easy," and really falling for this undercover police officer's ruse here, giving into a common misconception where a law enforcement officer has to tell you if he is a cop or not. That's a common misconception. That's not in the Constitution, as he says to Badger here. But of course, despite Badger's reservations about getting arrested and selling to an undercover police officer, at the same time, I guess he has plausible deniability, if you will, in respect to believing this man and saying, okay, I guess it's in the Constitution. He can't lie to me, but of course he can. And at the same time, despite Badger thinking that this is an undercover cop, at the same time, he almost sort of, I said it again, wants to convince himself that this is not an undercover cop, because at the end of the day, he's trying to unload the full pound of methamphetamine that was given to him by Jesse Pinkman so he can collect his 20% of the distribution fee as part of his arrangement with Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. So again, it's sort of him trying to talk himself out of the clear warning signs that he sees in front of him right here and right now. And of course, following this just unbelievable back and forth, again, I don't want to get bogged down. It's a very long, cold opening scene for all things considered, if you will. It's about a 5-minute one standalone shot. It was apparently shot in one. If you go back and listen to the Insider podcast for this episode, while this is all done in one take, there were a couple of scenes that were very cleverly edited out of the scene to make it look like it was one long continuous take. I don't want to sort of get bogged down in all the filming the background of the filming techniques that get involved in creating television. It is an interesting component of making the show, but I'm going to definitely focus more on the thematic elements of the plot and the story. You can go and listen to the Insider podcast if you want to hear that perspective. And but anyway, of course, following Badger, I guess falling for this undercover police officer's ruse, agreeing to sell a felony, or at least having selling methamphetamine to an undercover police officer. Not a very good idea. I would not recommend it. But of course, following him doing so, Badger is then immediately arrested in hilarious comedic fashion when this undercover officer pulls a gun out of his ankle holster, and the two vans, which Badger clearly saw and knew were cop vans, pull up and proceed to arrest him, thus beginning this initial sort of birth, as you mentioned, T, and as well as Paul Sura, Let the Games Begin, and really sort of beginning, it really is the big bang of the Breaking Bad universe, where worlds are colliding, to use a George Costanza reference. But yeah, so great, I mean, just unbelievable comedic, more lighthearted scene to initially start out this episode, and really, unbeknownst at the time when we were first watching this, but really setting the tone for the true amount of comedic humor that is going to be interjected in this episode of Breaking Bad. And of course, right off the bat following this, we then see a continuation of the story that we saw end the previous episode of Breaking Bad, where we saw Jane and Jesse holding hands, and we see a direct continuation to the how would you, as Vince Gilligan said in the Insider podcast, the post-coital quote-unquote afterglow, if you will. At Sam Fisher, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate the support. My roommate was blown away on my 21st birthday about Hank's death, like it was almost like he mourned Hank and almost wanted to stop watching the show. Wow, so you watched Ozymandias on your 21st birthday? That is pretty awesome. And yeah, that was a tough one. That one was a tough one for sure. I remember, the cliffhanger for Ozymandias when Walter White gets in Ed the Disappearer's car and they drive down the road and that dog just happens to walk across the shot there. And having to sit on that and revel in that and contemplate on that episode for an entire week, that was brutal. That one stuck with me for a long time. So blown away is quite the description there at Sam Fisher. I can definitely understand how your roommate would feel that way, because that was something that I was just contemplating on and ruminating on all week, just thinking, my goodness gracious, is this going to be just the most tragic, sad ending to a television series of all time? I don't know if I wanted to stop watching the show. There were still, three or two very crucial episodes still left in Granite State and Felina. I don't know if I definitely wanted to see how the show was going to end. That's quite the perspective of your roommate just saying, I'm done, like the SpongeBob meme. All right, I'm going to head out. So yeah, that is quite the perspective right there. But that was a tough one. Are you literally talking about right after that scene happened and didn't even want to watch the rest of the episode? Or are you saying after the episode concluded? Because that was my thoughts after the episode. But that would have been quite something if you really thought that right there in the moment at the end of Act 1 of that episode. That would have been something. But of course, getting back into this episode right here, we then see the continuation of Negro y Azul, where Jesse and Jane were holding hands, and the sort of will they, won't they, concluded with they will. And of course, we then see prior to the big reveal happening that not only were they initially interested in one another, but this relationship was finally consummated and truly foreshadowing the kindling romance that is going to ensue between these two beautiful young people who were in love here during season 2 of Breaking Bad. But of course, we then see this great sort of continuation where we saw the end of the previous episode, how Jesse's satellite would not connect. But of course, by the time this episode rolls around, we then see that not only has the satellite connected, but we also see this late night television commercial for Saul Goodman and Associates, the very sort of low rent, low stakes commercials with the green screen and all. Clearly can tell this is a green screen by the green outline around Saul Goodman's character. And of course, we didn't know it at the time, but with the benefit of hindsight, it's a direct continuation and a direct callback to the low budget, low quality commercials that Saul Goodman and Jimmy McGill created over the course of Better Call Saul as a series. And of course, that's immediately where my mind goes to when I'm watching this commercial right here. Again, there's so much to unpack. Theoretically, I feel like I could spend hours and hours and hours just on breaking down this commercial and the backstory that comes with it as a result of what was displayed to us over the course of Better Call Saul. But truly an unbelievable piece of foreshadowing here, where this character here, that of course we also saw on the bus bench at the very beginning of this episode, is going to be a crucial supporting character in the universe of Breaking Bad that will forever be linked with Walter White and Jesse Pinkman. And my goodness gracious, just looking at this man right here to contemplate on and to think about all of the things that we know happened to him over the course of Better Call Saul with Lalo Salamanca and with Mike Ehrmantraut and with him out in the desert. This is the same man who undertook all of those ventures that we as the audience during the first watching of this episode ever, whenever it was for you, prior to you seeing Better Call Saul, that's immediately where my mind went to. My goodness, the things that this man went through over the course of Better Call Saul was really something to behold here. And it's, again, I don't want to sort of get bogged down in this commercial right here, but of course there'll be a lot of opportunities to discuss the backstory of Saul Goodman based on what we know occurred over the course of Better Call Saul. But yeah, it's so true. I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit, but it's so true what Peter Gould said about you'll watch Breaking Bad in an entirely different light after finishing season 6 of Better Call Saul. And not only that, that's sort of an understatement. I cannot help but watch Breaking Bad in an entirely different light. I cannot see the show in the same way during my very first watch or during my second, third, fourth watch prior to the creation of Better Call Saul. It's just the way my mind perceives this show is completely different, and it will forever be changed, and there's just nothing that I can personally do about it based on all of my knowledge of the backstory of Better Call Saul. As Sam Fisher, he was too shocked, not that he didn't want to watch it, but when we went to Granite State, he was like, you have to pause it. This is crazy. But we kept watching anyway. I see what he's... Okay, so I see. It was a sort of initial reaction, but of course he carried on and continued, of course, to see those final 2 episodes. How could you not in this unbelievable show? But yes, so following this and us seeing the quote-unquote afterglow, to quote Vince Gilligan, we then see the relationship and the... How would we put this here? Just, we really see a sort of... Again, the crutch word. We see a... Further, we further peel back the depth and layers of this relationship that's going to be displayed to us over the course of this series, and of course over the course of season 2, ultimately prior to the death of Jane Margolis. And what's very interesting about this scene is that we learn here that during the sort of back and forth conversing, the pillow talk, if you will, following the relations between these 2 characters, we learn following Jesse asking Jane if she minds if he lights up a joint following them having sex. She says, do what you want to do, I guess. Jesse sort of, I can't help but use that crutch, but again, maybe it's my preconceived bias towards absurdism, where nothing is true besides the fact that nothing is true. So that's why I'm prefacing and caveating everything with the phrase sort of, because this is just my perspective, and I could absolutely be incorrect, and someone could have a completely different perspective that is completely different from my own. Maybe that's why I'm using the crutch word, but that's neither here nor there, even though I'm clearly focusing on it. But following Jesse asking Jane whether or not it's okay if he lights one, Jane says, do what you're going to do, I guess. Jesse is a little bit perturbed by Jane's demeanor appearing to shift initially. She's following him offering this to her. She begins to get dressed, and it seems as though she's going to unceremoniously leave very quickly. Jesse's a little bit confused as to why she is doing this, but of course we then learn an extremely crucial component of this story that's going to be integral to the relationship between these 2 characters, that Jane Margolis, last name currently unknown at this point in time in the series, is currently a recovering drug addict. We don't know the types of drugs that she uses, but she's currently in, I would imagine, Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know if it was ever completely revealed to us. It's probably Narcotics Anonymous, but we see her very gracefully, artistically flip her 18th month chip to Jesse Pinkman, showing to him that this is a crucial component of her life, and she's a recovering addict, and she doesn't want to partake in any of these activities. How, yes, while a small amount of marijuana is not going to kill you in the moment, it's the stepping stones, as she says. It's the gateway drug premise, and say what you will about that, but irrespective of that, the tenets of this Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, you cannot use any sort of substance, even moderately in small quantities. The point is complete and total abstinence, so there's no way that Jane, adhering to her sobriety, is allowed to do this. And it's just a very interesting shift where, following Jesse learning this initially, I would imagine it's because he wants to continue his connection with Jane, and how he clearly is, oh my goodness, he clearly is quite attracted to her and wants to continue this romantic relationship with her, then proceeds to say, oh, I don't really burn one that much anymore. It's sort of just a now and again type of thing. I won't do it in the house, really sort of conceding this request, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Sort of accepting Jane's request and sort of agreeing to Jane's request that he no longer uses drugs in the house, and how she doesn't want to partake in them. And with Jesse wanting to bond with her and continue to get closer to her, he is altering something that he clearly wants to do. And if Jane, I would imagine, agreed to smoke weed with him, I don't think his perspective would be, oh, it's just a now and again type thing I'm not really doing anymore. He would likely, again, maybe I'm not giving Jesse the the proper benefit of the doubt, but I would imagine he would sort of have the opposite perspective just based on the nature of him wanting to continue to build this relationship with Jane. But again, I'm sort of playing Freudian psychotherapist here for some reason, but it's just sort of an interesting perspective. And despite the sort of new information that's presented to us about this storyline, we then see Jesse saying to her, are we cool, making sure that they're going to be on good speaking terms and that this is not going to be a one-time sort of thing. Jane, while she doesn't say that they're good, says to him, your satellite's on, the picture's pretty great, and we can sort of tell by the very coy smile that Jane gives to Jesse that, okay, we're on good terms. It's okay that you use drugs. I'm still incredibly attracted to you for various sorts of reasons, and I talked about this a little bit in the previous episode when Jane first agreed to go into Jesse Pinkman's house, despite all of her initial reservations about being involved with a drug dealer, if you will, despite her being a recovering drug user, and clearly likely knowing in her head that this is not the best road to go down. I would imagine that in Narcotics Anonymous, I'm not 100% sure, someone could correct me on this if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to associate with people who are dealing drugs and using drugs. That seems like a pretty obvious thing that could cause a regression of your sobriety. But despite all of this, and I love the expression that Vince Gilligan used on the Insider podcast, there's clearly an incredible attraction to Jesse Pinkman by Jane Margolis. And again, why is she attracted to Jesse? We could only speculate. I mean, how does one explain love? I mean, love is by definition unexplainable. I sort of go back to that unbelievable scene in Anchorman when they're asking him what is love, and then they start to break out in song of Afternoon Delight. Really sort of love, that's the whole point of love. You can't, it's indescribable. And my goodness gracious, why does this keep popping up? And so, yes, again, for whatever reason, Jane is incredibly attracted to this, this man, Jesse Pinkman. I mean, he's very conventionally attractive, that beautiful set of white teeth, despite the fact he uses methamphetamine. And again, I don't want to put words in Jane's character's mouth. We can only speculate, and we have our thoughts, and there are probably some pretty obvious reasons why she would find this character so attractive. But as Vince Gilligan said, unbeknownst to Jane at the time, this attraction, this kindling of this romance, maybe pun intended, as Vince Gilligan said, is truly like the moth being attracted to the fire. And when he said that on the Insider podcast, I'm like, wow, that is a great, profound description of this subplot that happens here over, well, not even subplot, over this crucial plot that happens here over the course of season 2 of Breaking Bad. And yes, unbeknownst to Jane, just like the moth, the insect is attracted to the light, and it ultimately leads to that insect's demise. I'm comparing Jane to an insect here, and I guess Vince Gilligan sort of did that too, not to be offensive to Jane's character, but yes, it's a great example of the attraction that will end up being the result of one's demise. That is truly a poetic, literary, thematic allegory. Is that the right word? Allegory? So yes, really enjoyed this scene. Of course, like I talked about when I first saw Jesse Pinkman rent this apartment from Jane while she was only in that one scene, even the very first time I watched that, I mean, it was pretty clear and damn obvious that these two characters were going to get together in some capacity. It would have been the biggest upset, in my opinion, if the will they, won't they ended up in a won't they. You sort of saw the writing on the wall a mile away, and this episode here definitely continued to just provide new layers and new context and new depth to this relationship that's extremely crucial to this season and beyond in respect to the actions that Jesse Pinkman will undertake in season 3 of Breaking Bad. Yeah, Beth Montgomery. I don't know. It definitely helps me speak faster for sure. That is for sure. At Green Lizard Balls, I always had hair. I was bald because I was choosing to shave my head at Green Lizard Balls. But I appreciate you for pointing that out. At Smuggler's Choice, Breaking Bad is like fine wine. It only matures with age and never loses its flavor. I'm not a drinker. I'm not a big red wine fan or any wine fan for that nature. But I can definitely appreciate the analogy. At Stone Yoda, what is up? Jesse is trash for getting involved with someone in. I mean, yeah. I mean, that is. I don't want to jump the gun here at Stone Yoda, but yeah, my mind goes there. I will definitely get to that at some point down the line during the scene following Combo's death. in Mandela, if I'm not mistaken, where Jane finally regresses and backslides on her recovery. That is definitely that is some deep food for thought right there. And I'm gonna I'm going to pull no punches on that one in respect to how poor Jesse looks by that decision that he made in the moment right there. So, but that is a discussion for a little bit down the line. That's such a dark and sort of tragic element of the story, then we don't want to focus on that right now. This is a lighthearted episode. This is one of the most lighthearted episodes in the entire season of Breaking Bad. So this is definitely a positive. Well, we're all about positivity and being as upbeat as possible in this episode prior to the darkness that is absolutely coming our way down the line. What is up at Shell as well? But yes, following this, we then get a brief glimpse into the story of Skyler and Walt here. It's not a big component of the story by any stretch of the imagination. This is the only scene, if I'm not mistaken, that Skyler is in. And of course, we see her speaking with Walt, and we quickly learn that she's going to work on a Saturday. And this is sort of to add insult to the injury here, where not only was Walt incredibly aggrieved and upset by the fact that his pregnant wife had to go back to work had to go back to work because of the fact that Gretchen and Elliot allegedly were no longer paying for their for Walter White's cancer treatment. Again, I discussed it more in the previous episode, but to add insult to injury here, not only does she have to work, she has to work on a Saturday too. And of course, Skyler justifies this by saying she's getting paid double time and we can use the money. And despite Walt clearly being upset by this in the previous episode, we can definitely see his demeanor here as much more resigned to the fact that his wife, in order to continue this lie that he's concocting to his family, there's really no way out of his wife going back to work without him coming clean about the fact that he truly has tens of thousands of dollars on his person right now and is a methamphetamine manufacturer and distributor himself. And there's no way to get Skyler to not go back to work without coming clean, and that's not possible. So he's resigned to the fact that his 8-month pregnant wife has to now go back to work. Of course, also foreshadowing. Again, I don't want to get too much into this. Again, it's not a big component of this story right here, but we can see Skyler. She definitely seems rather excited to go to work here. And again, I don't want to sort of get bogged down into really sort of psychoanalyzing the mind of Skyler White here, but in the simplest terms, I definitely got a vibe from watching that scene. The forever looming this scene was foreshadowing the forever looming inevitable relationship that was going to happen between Ted Beneke and Skyler over the course of this season and beyond. That's sort of what I got to it. And again, we don't know what's going on in Skyler White's mind here in this scene, but that's definitely where my mind went to. And I don't want to get bogged down in the Skyler, trying to analyze what's happening in Skyler's mind when we really don't know what's happening. So, but anyway, following that sort of brief continuation and providing us continued progress in that story, we then see following Skyler leaving, Marie Schrader calls their home and wants to speak to Skyler in a very panicked tone of voice. This immediately piques Walter White's interest, and he answers the phone. And of course, following him answering, the scene then immediately cuts to Walter White showing up at Hank and Marie's house, where it is then revealed to Walt everything that we as the audience saw in the previous episode that happened in Negro y Azul. We're hearing the backstory of everything that we saw. Of course, I don't want to repeat everything, but in the grand scheme of things, Marie is repeating what happened in Juarez, following Tortuga's head exploding on the tortoise, and Hank being a witness to that and clearly suffering some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder here in the scene. A very sort of interesting tidbit of backstory here where Marie is saying to Walt that despite him being essentially emotionally incapacitated here, and understandably so, suffering from a likely post-event shock as well as post-traumatic stress. I mean, I feel like I'm using those terms relatively interchangeably. It's an interesting sort of tidbit of information when Marie tells to Walt that he spoke with I believe ASAC Remy or ASAC Merkert, and during that conversation, he put on a brave face and was almost as if he wasn't suffering emotionally at all. But of course, following that conversation, he immediately went back to bed and holed himself off because of the emotional distress that he's experiencing. So clearly not wanting to put on the fact that he's suffering so much internally, which we will see down the line when he eventually goes back to work. But of course, with that backstory being presented to us, we then see Walt going in to try to speak with Hank because Marie has been unable to do so. And of course, following Hank initially sitting up out of bed and again putting on this facade that he was emotionally okay, Hank is then, clearly putting two and two together here that Walt is not showing up serendipitously for no reason. He tells Walt, so I imagine you're here because Marie told you what happened in Juarez. Hank then repeating everything that happened and explaining his emotional state, if you will, to the audience right here. And again, not wanting to get bogged down in everything that Hank Schrader says here in this scene, but of course, following Hank confiding in Walt initially in a shallower level, Walt then proceeds to say, have you ever thought about talking about this with someone? And of course, Hank's immediate reaction is to be dismissive and say, no, I can't be talking to a shrink. That's career suicide. And as I've talked a little bit over the course of these retrospectives of season 1 and season 2 of Breaking Bad, it's definitely something that I've noticed where people in this show do not do a very good job articulating their feelings and emotions. They tend to emotionally cope in very not healthy ways, with Jesse using drugs, with Hank doing things like getting into bar fights in order to pump himself up and deal with his emotional stress of all the events that are happening over the course of his life. And it is kind of funny where I know that mental health, as I've stated, it was not as commonplace and socially acceptable in the year 2008 as it continues to be as we progress here into now, 2023. But it is kind of interesting how you really respect a character like Howard Hamlin, who was really a man before his time, sort of going to talk therapy and really expressing and articulating his emotions and dealing with his feelings in a much more rational, healthy, non-violent way compared to the more quote-unquote manly way of what you're supposed to do, which just is repress your feelings and do something else which makes you distract yourself from them. The common occurrence of pushing your feelings deep down and drowning them with alcohol was the sort of thing you were supposed to do as a man. And how, as Hank Schrader is saying, talking to a shrink is career suicide. It's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of vulnerability. And that's really not a healthy way to sort of think at all. It's not unhealthy to articulate one's emotions. It's definitely way healthier to do that than to, as soon as you have any emotional distress in your life, immediately revert to methamphetamine, as Jesse Pinkman does. As it's in the exact same manner as someone would revert to alcohol to deal with their emotions. And again, I'm not a professional health person. I'm not a mental health professional. But that just sort of this guy's on the internet's perspective on how to successfully articulate one's emotions. But kind of went down a rabbit hole a little bit on that one. But following Hank's initial reservations, Walt then offers himself up as a sort of shoulder to lean on, a sort of person who Hank can confide in here. And despite Hank's initial reservations, he definitely is much more comfortable confiding in a family member. I mean, truly, no one. I mean, I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school here. There's definitely a type of bond with family that is just so much stronger than with even a very close friend. I mean, maybe people with very close friends, it's akin to family, but there's something about that family bond that is truly, I think about it all the time, as Hector said to the cousins in the episode entitled 1 Minute, La Familia es Todo. I mean, family is everything. And a family is such a key, strong theme in this episode with Walt and what he's allegedly doing for his family, and even Salamanca, the Salamanca family, and Gus and his family, if you will, with Max Arciniega being much more than a business partner, likely being akin to family for Gus Fring. So this bond of family being the vessel by which Hank can even a little bit confide in Walter White here in this scene. At Sam Fisher, thank you so much for the super chat again. Really appreciate the support. Watching the show again, I really didn't like Jesse this time around, as everything he did was a problem for Walt, and his usefulness expired after Saul. That's a very sort of interesting take there you have at Sam Fisher. I mean, I definitely agree with you wholeheartedly through and through that the more I watch this show, the less I like Jesse Pinkman. I'm pretty clear I've made my points very clear on that one. Of course, I initially just, I think like a lot of people who watch the show for the first time, really gravitated towards Jesse as being this sort of very unique, for lack of a better term, almost like cool, interesting character who was a part of this Albuquerque criminal underworld and was living a life which I could sort of almost vicariously live through, if you will, from the safety of my computer screen, where because this story is so great, you really feel so immersed in the story, you can really feel like, wow, I can really see this very interesting, unique perspective of a life of a character like Jesse Pinkman. In reality, it's at the end of when the show's over, you're glad that you're not a part of that life at all. You don't want someone to point a gun at the back of your head. You want to sleep soundly at night. But yes, the more following that initial, for lack of a better term, shallowness that I had in respect to why I liked Jesse Pinkman so much, I definitely agree with your assessment that the more I watch this show, and the deeper we get into this story, I did find myself liking Jesse less and less. And as you said, everything Jesse did I really didn't like Jesse this time around, as everything he did was a problem for Walt, and his usefulness expired after Saul. That's quite the broad sentiment there. I mean, I would have to sort of think more about the story as a whole, before I really sort of agree to that. His usefulness expiring. That's quite the expression there. I'm trying to. Just off my initial sort of thinking about that. He definitely did seem like a. He did seem like a little bit of an albatross, if you will, following Saul's coming into the fold. A little bit of an anchor, a little bit of a thorn in one's side. As he said in the episode entitled Breakage, at that moment in time, it was very true how you need me more than I need you, Walt. But I'm trying to think of come to think of it, the more I sort of initially sort of ruminated on it after you say that, I'm trying to think of just how useful Jesse was following this venture. And, it's, oh my God, my mind's going to some pretty dark places here, but the sort of the most G-rated thing I can sort of say about all this is that it's, in many respects, Walter White's emotional connection that he had to Jesse Pinkman in many ways was kind of a problem for him. And if he really didn't have this emotional attachment to this character like Jesse, he might have gotten away with it all in the end. And I'm really jumping the gun here in respect to Jesse maybe being worried that Walt was going to, whack him when he outlived his usefulness. But that's definitely that's a very sort of deep thought that we would have there for sure at Sam Fisher when you say, there's a lot to that when I just come to think of it. But my roommate hated him, LOL. We both agreed Walt would be fine if Jesse died after Saul, and Walt would be rich and Ozymandias wouldn't happen. Yeah, in many respects that's true. It is very true. I've thought about that, where Walt wanted to set Jesse up with a whole new life. In the episode entitled Confessions, when he proceeded to, was it Confessions when he was it Confessions when he proceeded to burn down Walter White's house before he was stopped by Hank, following his even when he had so many opportunities to cut himself of Jesse Pinkman prior to that, following Jesse's erratic behavior in season 5, part 2 of Breaking Bad, where he's throwing millions of dollars out of a car window and being very erratic and clearly having a problem with his business partner, Walter White. At that moment in time, had Walter White not said, I want to hook you up with a brand new life far away, had he much taken the fly swatter and the mosquito approach, as Saul Goodman will say later in this episode, it is very dark but very true. Had he gotten rid of Jesse Pinkman right there and then in the desert, all of his problems would have really gone away because Jesse was really the only, not even loose end, because Walter White really did tie up all of the loose ends, but the way Jesse and Hank and Steve were able to manipulate him with that photo of the money buried in the desert by acquiring bits of information from Huell Babineau and being able to concoct this long, sort of far-fetched, but in the end, successful plan that occurred in the episode entitled Tahajali. I mean, yeah, it's sort of very dark thoughts, and again, bringing us down here with this the darkness in this very uplifting episode here. But yeah, old Yeller at Stone Yoda, that's a good way to put it. But yeah, it's definitely something that my mind thought about how Walt's emotional attachment to Jesse was kind of his downfall. It's definitely something I've absolutely thought about at Sam Fisher, and I appreciate this perspective for sure. Yep, that's absolutely right. He had no evidence. It was all just his speculations, as Skylar said to him in the episode entitled Buried. That's absolutely true. But anyway, getting back into this episode here, I mean, just really powerful piece of dialogue here. We're following Hank initially agreeing to confide in Walter White even a little bit. He says that unbelievable piece of dialogue here where me and you, I'm butchering it, butchering this dialogue and paraphrasing it a little bit, but we don't have somewhat of an experience. We don't have much of an experiential overlap in what I deal with. Of course, following him telling just the unbelievably graphic and alluding to the unbelievably graphic and gruesome nature of what happened in Juarez. And it's actually kind of interesting where Walt says, and I mean, I'm kind of glossing over the dialogue a little bit here, but there was one component of dialogue where Marie earlier says that he showed up here unannounced, and Walt said, are you, prior to Walt saying, are you back here for good, Hank said to Walt that Special Agent in Command Remy sends him home. And again, I'm not 100% sure if this was actually the case about whether or not he's lying to Walt here and saying that Sac Remy sent him home to recover after everything happened, or if Hank really just sort of took it upon himself to say, I'm out of here, I need some time to recover after all this. I always wondered that. It was never really revealed to us. I would imagine that Remy did send him home. I wouldn't imagine that he would have been able to, come to think of it, just go back to work and act like everything was okay if he just went AWOL without the permission of Remy. So he did probably send him home there, and we can really then see the vibrato that Hank is putting on, where he's saying, I want to be back there in the field. Remy sends his second highest ranking agent home. Like that's some great logic right there. But of course, clearly, irrespective of Hank's vibrato, we can clearly see the emotional distress he is experiencing. As one would, the graphic, to imagine someone having to witness an explosion and the gore of seeing someone with a compound fracture, the bone sticking out of the skull. I don't even know if that's even the definition of compound fracture, with just the effective amputation of a limb as a result of an explosion. To see all of that in graphic nature, I don't blame Hank Schrader at all for his actions and emotions here in this scene. But of course, following that great line that Hank delivers, we then see, of course, Walt say to him, that great look on his face, what if I told you we did? And of course, initially the audience is, of course, thinking there's no way Walt's going to confide in him that I'm Heisenberg here. But then Walt then begins to go on a very powerful, I don't even know if monologue is the right word, but I guess monologue is kind of the right word. I feel like monologue can sometimes have a negative connotation. But again, I don't want to repeat every single bit of detail here, but the point of that Walter White is trying to get at is that his whole life he lived in fear. And at the end of the day, this fear of things that might happen in life, being fearful of these maybe possible scary things that could happen in one's life, truly did petrify him for 50 years, but ever since his cancer diagnosis, he now sleeps soundly at night. And he came to realize that it truly is the fear that's the worst of it. To again paraphrase FDR, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. And again, it's a very powerful quotation, and in many respects, it's very, very true, where the fear that you're thinking, it's all in your head, and not in all cases. The fear of someone coming to kill you, like Tuco Salamanca, is all too real. But some of these, I guess, nebulous maybe fears don't serve any benefits and do nothing but incapacitate oneself. And it was very powerful and very telling, where Walt is basically saying, following that realization that, as he says later down the line in season 4 of a Better Call Saul, all life comes with a death sentence. Following that realization of maybe his own mortality following his cancer diagnosis, this is just me just extrapolating here. There was no real point to live with that fear anymore, where there was no fear in the inevitable because he was truly came face to face with it, and as he will say later down the line, decided to live life on his own terms, and said to Hank Schrader here in this scene, and as he said about going out and being in the real world and kicking that bastard as hard as you can right in the teeth, sort of just kicking life in the teeth and living life on your own terms and not living in fear, and the fear is in your head. It was a very, very powerful piece of dialogue. I feel like I definitely did not articulate that in the most Dostoevsky-esque sense. I feel like I could have done a much more eloquent job articulating that, I guess, analogy that Walter White is alluding to here in this scene. But yes, very powerful piece of dialogue here to sort of get Hank out of his funk. And despite Hank, clearly this not being a cure-all for Hank, as we can see by the palpitations and palpitations, but the anxiety and the heavy breathing that he experiences in the elevator, like he did in the episode entitled Breakage, if I'm not mistaken. Or was it Breakage? Or Breakage, or maybe it was Down. It might have been Down. It might have been the episode entitled Down, following his promotion. Despite this conversation not being a cure-all, it definitely helped Hank, in my humble opinion, put things in perspective and help him get back on that horse and get back into the real world and not be afraid of the fear, which Walter White is basically saying you're afraid of. You're only afraid of fear. That's the only fear you're suffering from. And at the end of the day, there's no point in being fearful of things that may happen in life. It serves no benefit to yourself in any respect. And just to go off on a quick tangent here, something else that I found myself thinking about here in this scene was the fact that it's kind of ironic where Walt is Heisenberg here, and this is the main man who's trying to catch him, but the sort of cognitive dissonance of Walt having this true attachment and this true emotional love and empathy for his family member, his brother-in-law here, and wanting him to get him out of his funk. At the same time, it would have served him and his drug empire much better had he done nothing and kept Hank incapacitated and kept this, as Hank said, this very successful ardent field agent on the sidelines. And it's very ironic how Walter White is sort of the one who's prodding Hank and sort of getting him to get back on the trail and get back on the scent. It's very ironic when you think about it, how Walt is essentially telling Hank to get back in the world and go catch me. It's, again, I swear this has been a common literary trope in a lot of stories, but it's kind of escaping me, where the sort of villain is sort of goading the Elliot Ness-esque character protagonist who's hunting him. That's definitely where my mind went. And it's also where my mind went down the line in season 4 of Breaking Bad, where following Hank thinking that he had gotten Heisenberg, this Gale Bedecker, and Walt, of course, this was from a completely different reason. This was more from his pride and ego as opposed to his attachment to family. But his own pride and ego, again, made Hank get back on the trail and ironically lead Hank to eventually catch him, where had he had just played into his hand and said, yep, Gale was the one, Gale was the genius, this would have let Hank kept Hank's guard down and would not let him then begin digging in the lab book and putting the connection of Gus Fring to Gale Bedecker. So yeah, it is very ironic how for a multitude of reasons, following the main man who's catching Heisenberg being down or satisfied or incapacitated, the flaw of having pride and ego definitely caused Hank to get back out there. But again, it's hard to sort of rationalize his love and empathy for his family being a flaw, but I guess in a very cutthroat business sense, if you equate the Albuquerque criminal underworld methamphetamine distribution to a business, in a very cutthroat business sense, he should have even put his family aside for the sake of his prospering business venture, if you will. But again, that's sort of just a little bit of a tangent, and definitely where my mind went to when I was rewatching this episode for sure. At Sam Fisher, thank you again so much for the super chat. To hammer home the dislike I have for Jesse, James McGill should have gotten a Jesse-like ending, and Jesse should have gotten a Saul ending. Yeah, I know what you're saying there at Sam Fisher, and to tell you the truth, I think I probably at most points in my life thought that verbatim. And it's a very complicated thing. Again, that's a whole nother can of worms and a whole nother rabbit hole to potentially go down. But yes, it is very ironic how Jesse lives happily ever after and Saul doesn't. And it appears that, again, both characters, I would imagine, both came to terms and with their past transgressions and their emotional and personal and character flaws in completely opposite ways. But of course, I guess the creators sort of justified Jesse living happily ever after on his fairy merry way, to quote the television show Louie, is that he served his justice and penance in that cage in the hole in Jack Walker's compound for 3 months. And that absolved him of all of his crimes, and that made him thus live happily ever after. But again, I mean, it was a really powerful piece of dialogue that Ed the Disappearer said to him in the episode, and not the episode, the movie El Camino, where Jesse again proceeded to paint himself as the victim, saying, these men, they put me in a cage, they treated me like dirt, and Ed the Disappearer cut him off in the middle of his speech saying, you know, you love to pull on, I'm paraphrasing here again, you love to pull on people's heartstrings, paint yourself as a victim, why don't you try your luck with the police? And it is very true where maybe I would imagine if Saul was very articulate and able to spin himself initially as a victim and give himself 7.5 years. At the same time, I guess Jesse could have painted himself as a victim, and you wonder about the actual evidence that they'd have on him. But yes, I mean, if Saul Goodman was going to get a life plus 100 plus years, or however it was, the amount is escaping me, life plus 80 years. If Jesse was going to get a sentence, if Saul was going to get a sentence like that, then Jesse Pinkman is absolutely an accessory to manufacturing. I don't even know if it would be an accessory. I mean, it would be manufacturing on this scale. It would be a life in prison mandatory sentence. And again, there's a whole nother discussion about the ethics and the morality of mandatory minimums. I don't even know if there are mandatory minimums anymore. For federal, I'm not even 100% sure. I think the judge can give any sentence they deem appropriate. I'm not a lawyer, someone can correct me on that. But yeah, it's definitely something I've thought about, where Jesse's living happily ever after in Alaska. But should Johnny Law ever catch up to him, he is absolutely the prosecution, the federal prosecution, is absolutely in their right to pursue life imprisonment charges for Jesse Pinkman if they can pursue them for Saul Goodman. And again, as I've said, I don't know if Your Honor, Jesse Pinkman saying in court, Your Honor, I'm very sorry. I feel very bad about the fact that my drug manufacturer boss, I was afraid that he was going to kill me and my partner and replace me with someone else, so I killed that person. I felt really bad about it. I don't know if that's an acceptable defense in court. I felt really bad about committing first-degree murder. I was very sorry about it. I cried. I don't know if that is a sort of I don't. Good luck arguing that in court, to quote Saul Goodman here in this episode. But what is up, at Justin Cruz? I had a busy day as well. I'm glad you're here. But yeah, that's it's great food for thought. It's something that I've absolutely thought about again and again at Sam Fisher. I definitely compare and contrast the endings that were given to Saul versus Jesse, and how Saul initially painted himself as a victim, but then said, you know what, I'm not a victim. I was a willful participant. But if you put a gun to Jesse's head, metaphorically speaking, I think he would say he was a victim, and I think he would believe it. I don't think he would say he was a willing participant like Jesse did, like Saul did. So it's, again, interesting food for thought. We're definitely getting way down the line here, and it is true. I wanted to sort of keep this one a little bit more upbeat and positive, but you know, it's really hard to not talk about a lot of themes in this show without getting into the real dark nature of all of it, because despite the uplifting comedic nature of this episode, there's so many dark elements to this wonderful Breaking Bad universe. But yes, as I've talked about in many episodes in this retrospective, something that I've definitely noticed following my second, third, fourth, 15th watch of this series is that they really love juxtaposing Hank Schrader's scenes immediately on top of the illegal criminal scenes of the person he's trying to catch. I really love the very intentional juxtaposition here from an artistic storytelling point of view that the creators interject here in this series. And of course, following Walt saying that unbelievable speech to Hank Schrader, we then see them both at Jesse Pinkman's house running their money through this money counting machine. I love the this is neither here nor there, but I love the flaming hot Funyun bag that's over here. Clearly stapling Jesse Pinkman's diet. A very subtle but intentional, hilarious little bit of information that was provided here in this scene. But of course, following them testing this machine, Walt then saying, I want this machine running 24 hours a day. Me and you are gonna feed this machine. Before I get into that, what is up at Just Dan? Thank you so much for the super chat, man. Really appreciate the support. What's up, Anton? How have you been, man? I've been doing pretty good, man. I can't complain. Like I said, I've mentioned this before. I'm very passionate about what I'm doing in my real life. I don't know if I want to get into it here, talking about my personal life, but I'm very passionate about what I'm doing. I have a whole entirely separate life outside of talking about Better Call Saul on YouTube and Breaking Bad on YouTube. But yeah, I've been very, very busy doing that. And I hope you've been doing well as well. And despite me being busy in my real life, I truly mean this. I love the show. I could talk about it again and again. I watched this show probably 10 times through, even before I even contemplated ever making a YouTube channel and talking about this show. I would have watched it, and I talked about it irrespective of having to make content about it. It's something that I truly have a passion for, and I loved even before I did this YouTube channel. And again, I'm going off. You ask, how have I been? I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but just in respect to sort of making other content that I'm not as passionate about, it's definitely, again, I feel like it comes through. I mean, I feel like if someone's making content they're not passionate about, I feel like it kind of comes through. But it's neither here nor there. I'm doing well. I can't complain. I exist here in the universe at this moment in time in the cosmos. Can't complain too much, and I hope everyone's doing well as well. Like I've talked about in the past, you can literally watch anything you want on your television or computer. You can literally watch anything that's ever been created ever. You can watch a silent film from 1900, and you're here watching me talk about Season 2, Episode 8 of Breaking Bad. I really appreciate the support. I really appreciate you tuning in even for a little bit. And I'm really enjoying talking about this show right here and right now. And thank you again so much for the support, man, at Just Dan. I really appreciate it. But yes, getting back into the story right here, of course, the overarching premise that I noticed here in this scene here is that it's the very positive windfall that Walt and Jesse are now experiencing following Jesse being painted as this tough guy killer, as being the man out in Albuquerque. We see Jesse saying they're splitting $45,000 each. A little bit of a shout out here to Walt saying "not yours, I presume." A little bit of foreshadowing of this story converging together here in this scene. But of course, yes, unbelievable windfall here for Walt and Jesse. They're splitting $45,000, which should be $48,000. And of course, as we know as a result of the math, $40,000 per pound. They keep 80% each, 20% go to the distributors. So they split $32,000 a pound. So that's $16,000 each a pound. 3 pounds is $48,000, and it's only 45 because again, not one. I'll get into that component of the story a little bit later. But what's very crucial about this point of the story is that everything is going according to plan. The distribution is finally taking off. They're making just money hand over fist. They've probably made like $45,000 in maybe a couple weeks, in less than a month. I mean, this is more money. $45,000 each. This is more money than some people make in a year. I mean, $90,000, that's more money than most people make in a year. So this is just an enormous amount of money that they have made in a very short amount of time. I mean, to quote Jesse Pinkman, when he asked, why do you do this money mainly? That's the whole point of why Walter White is doing all of this, is the money. And it's a very crucial component of the story because theoretically, had Walter White gotten $5 million from somewhere that fell out of the sky, or if he was able to make millions and millions of dollars via this means of distribution, the story would have eventually ended because I'm contemplating myself mid-sentence there, but it is true where how Jesse says down the line, the episode entitled Buyout, how you worked it out in your mind that you just needed $737,000, and now you're being offered a $5 million buyout, and you're not taking it. And again, there's a whole deep, complex component of that story revolving Walt and gray matter. And who knows, I mean, maybe if $5 million fell out of the sky at this moment in time, he wouldn't have retired. But the dialogue he says to Jesse when he's basically under the influence of sleeping pills, where the perfect time to have died would have been right after his first deal with Gus Fring. But of course, I believe unbeknownst to him, or maybe no, I believe unbeknownst to him, the cousins wanted to kill him. So again, it's so complicated. There's so many different working parts here in respect to the story. But the very, very long-winded point I'm trying to get at here is that this steady supply of money had to be interrupted here for the sake of the story, because theoretically, I mean, we could play the what if game all day long, but theoretically, had Walter White gotten millions and millions of dollars, or at least if he had gotten his $737,000 within a couple of months, the story would have been over. Because maybe, I'll caveat this with maybe, because we don't know, we could go back and forth all day, maybe it would have been enough, and maybe the trials and tribulations that he experienced over the course of Breaking Bad, which eventually caused him to turn down that $5 million buyout, maybe all of that needed to happen before he made the decision down in season 5 of Breaking Bad. So the point I'm trying to get at is here, this absolutely had to be written into the story, where anytime Walter White achieves a large portion of money, you notice that the money is then immediately essentially taken away. Where when he first achieves his money with Tuco Salamanca, and he gets his $70,000, you think, all right, this is going to be a windfall, this is going to be a steady source of income. Immediately, the money is ripped away, where the sort of business transaction with Tuco is ripped apart, and not only that, that money is then chopped in half, following Jesse's money getting taken away. And then, as he says to Jesse, do you know how much money I have left after funding the world's most expensive alibi in my first round of chemo? Zero. Basically showing that if theoretically the reason why they have to keep having this severance of the steady supply of income here is that if Walter White ever got that amount of money prior to all of the trials and tribulations he experienced, it would have greatly hindered the story. So that's kind of the point I'm trying to get at here, the very long-winded point. And of course, again, it's very intentional here, where I'm definitely jumping ahead, but when Walter White finally gets that $480,000 at the end of the season, and finally everything is, yes, I did it, I'm so close to my goal for providing for my family. The problem with that is that, okay, so the money's not taken away from him here, but he loses his family, as we can see by Skyler essentially kicking him out of the house. But again, I'm really going down the line here in respect to the story of Breaking Bad. I'm really extrapolating out and really getting a little bit ahead over my skis here. But yes, prior to that, getting back into the story here, we then see Walter White saying this should be 48, not 45. Why are we short 6K? And of course, Jesse saying, don't freak out. We weren't ripped off like last time, but Badger hasn't kicked in his full amount. Them thinking that he is just not sold it all and is still, sleeping and is going to pull an all-nighter and eventually give them their money. And of course, we can definitely see the in the moment here, not trying to extrapolate out too much, but we can see in the moment the continued gradual character transformation and immediate personality transformation of Walter White into this Heisenberg character. And while he's not full-fledged Heisenberg yet at this moment in time, he is definitely forever dipping his toe, or continuing to dip his toe here in the Heisenberg waters, as we can see by his demeanor and his rapport with Jesse Pinkman here, saying, you're not his boss, you're his friend. This only works when he's scared of you. A very change in overall demeanor by Walter White, very akin to that scene of him putting the gun down on Jesse's counter, on this very counter in the episode entitled Breakage. And yes, of course, following this prodding by Jesse to then call Badger and initially call Badger and then go straight to voicemail, and Walter White saying, voicemail, a lot of respect you're getting from him, to paraphrase what's going on in Walter, not paraphrase, to surmise what might be going on in Walter White's mind. At Sam Fisher, thank you again so much for the super chat, man. Really appreciate the support. I think Walt did it for his ego. He could have stayed in the company, but felt his ego, but he felt his ego be bruised. He could have taken the handout, but his ego. Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to that statement right there at Sam Fisher. I talked about it a little bit in the episode entitled Peekaboo about, we'll never know, and we don't have the full story regarding why Walter White took that $5,000 buyout for his 1/3 stake in Gray Matter when he did. And, who knows? There's a lot to that. I mean, if you knew, I mean, no one can know, but if you could just extrapolate out that this company is going to be worth billions of dollars to take a buyout for, I mean, not even pennies on the dollar, for pesos on the dollar, in five grand for that company. That's, again, there's a lot goes into that. We don't know why Walter White did that. Was it risk aversion? Was it lack of confidence? I'm not really sure about that in respect to why he left the company, if you're talking about that initial company. But again, if you're talking more about the initial story right here, where he could have taken Elliot up on his offer, well, not really, because he did have the cancer diagnosis. And Elliot, who knows, might have not even, definitely probably wouldn't have even have given him that offer had he not been told that he has not been told that he had cancer. And but at the same time, yes, absolutely, in respect to not wanting to take that sort of charity handout from Gretchen and Elliot, rich girl adding to her millions. That really sort of really tells a lot of the story there at Sam Fisher for sure. And yeah, I talked about that in the episode entitled Peekaboo. I went into that pretty in depth during that scene that occurs in the restaurant in Santa Fe, where yes, I mean Walter White just felt so aggrieved and so what's the word I'm looking for here? He had such a grievance and felt so offended. There's a word I'm looking for here, but he just felt so abused and so just so abused by Gretchen and Elliot. He felt like he was done so wrong by these two people. I mean, whether or not that's the the truth is probably somewhere in the middle between what Gretchen and what Walt said, but he truly felt so aggrieved and his ego felt so bruised by what he perceived to have happened. And yes, for him to say, these people abused me, these people took advantage of me, these people stole from me, now what? I'm supposed to grovel and beg for your charity? My pride and my ego, as you said in your super chat, would not allow him to do that at all. And as I believe is a Greek parable, but it's so true about pride coming before the fall, and how despite a lot of human beings thinking that pride is a good thing and how we should have pride in various components in our life, it is very, very true, that parable, about how pride can be a very detrimental thing in our lives and can really be something that really hinders us and doesn't do the best for us. Because yes, I mean, if Walt just put that aside and said, "I'm going to let bygones be bygones," would it have been much better had he had just taken that handout and not done everything that he did over the course of Breaking Bad? And we have to remember that was prior to him ever meeting up with Tuco Salamanca, and he literally had to get. It was literally, as Vince Gilligan said, it was Deus ex machina, the solution from the sky that came down, where yes, he had killed Emilio and Crazy 8, but no retribution was coming after him for that. Not like the wrath of the Salamancas and the cartel for the sangre por sangre. Once he was in bed with Tuco, it was over. There was no return there. But truly, he had that opportunity to get out completely scot-free. He could have just buried what happened in the desert, even in his mind, could have justified it and rationalized it as self-defense, that these two people were going to kill me, and he could have gotten away with it all. But yes, his ego, pride cometh before the fall, to put the short of the long of it, if that's the expression. So to tie to in the simplest way of speaking, pride cometh before the fall for Walter White. Again, I'd have to remember. Are you talking about the poem Ozymandias at Sam Fisher? I'd have to go back and listen to that. I'm not 100% sure about which Ozymandias speech you're talking about. But yes, getting back into it here, we then see following Jesse getting a voicemail from Badger, then call Combo, and following Combo initially ducking him, we then see the sort of false bravado that Jesse is clearly putting on here for Walter White. Definitely not the true Jesse Pinkman. It's very clear to the audience that this is sort of false vibrato that he's putting on here, in my humble opinion. We can see Walter White being a little bit taken aback by it, that this is kind of an act he's putting on here for Walter White. And of course, following Jesse doing this, this prodding by Jesse towards Combo, then makes Combo reveal to him that Badger got arrested, and it's then revealed to Walt that Badger was arrested and they were too scared to tell me, and thus continuing to progress the story as we will see here over the course of this episode, where these two characters will eventually meet as a result of Badger's actions here at the very beginning of this episode, the notorious Saul Goodman. At Sam Fisher, I'll have to go back and listen to that again or watch or read that again. I'm not 100%. I'm not very well versed in that poem Ozymandias. I met a traveler in an antique land or something to that effect. I may even got the very first line wrong, but I will definitely go back and check that out as per your recommendation. But yes, sort of getting back into the ebb and flow of it here. This Albuquerque criminal underworld scene with Walt and Jesse is immediately then juxtaposed with, very intentionally so, as I discussed earlier, Hank Schrader going back to work, him taking Walter White's advice about, going out in the real world and kicking life right in the teeth, and following seeing him compose himself in the elevator and hyperventilate, and then walk down the hallway. It's then revealed to us that Hank continues to put on this very sort of machismo vibrato, acting as though everything is okay with his colleagues and compatriots at the DEA, being his very typical crass, and bold and vulgar self here in the office, and of course acting as though nothing is wrong, but of course following Hank telling Gomi, all right, let's get back to work like nothing has happened. We can see his partner here, Steve Gomez, being very concerned, and rightfully so, for his partner in crime here. I got partner in crime. I don't know if that's the best phrase here, given that they're DEA agents, but I guess a little bit taken back by Hank's demeanor here in the scene with Steve clearly knowing, as a result of word of mouth and otherwise, what happened in Juarez, and just the unbelievably graphic and gruesome nature of what Hank was a party to and witnessed. The death of a federale agent, 3 others getting wounded, and the one DEA agent, Venko, losing his leg. I think he's very taken aback by Hank Schrader's demeanor here in the scene. We're almost acting as though nothing is wrong. He's putting on a facade as if he's like a character like Lalo Salamanca, who truly is in many ways a psychopath and wouldn't be affected by all of that carnage and could sleep like a baby at night and act as if nothing is wrong. But of course, unbeknownst to Steve Gomez, but very known to the audience, that this is all an act put on by Hank Schrader, clearly trying to cultivate a certain image, a certain machismo tough guy for the office and for his partner here, and of course Steve Gomez maybe being a little bit taken aback by this, wondering, clearly maybe thinking that Hank isn't articulating his emotions in the most healthy way. Again, I'm sort of doing it again. I'm getting bogged down in the mind of a character and extrapolating and putting my own theoretical spin on it. But at the end of the day, we have no idea what's going on in Steve Gomez's mind. Of course, he does say to Hank, how you doing? How you doing? And Hank's, of course, saying, I'm fine. Just wanted to get down to brass tacks in business, not show any of his vulnerability or... At T, you definitely got me on that one. You got me on that one, at T. That's a good callback right there in respect to the goatee. I wasn't expecting that one. That is an OG pullback right there. But anyway, yes. Getting back into the story, Hank then says, "What's this that you kicked my way from APD?" Further progressing the story, where Gomez then tells him that they got Gomez then tells him they stumbled upon that notorious blue meth when he did some calling around. Hank very perked up, and his attention got here by the respect attention got this information really gets Hank's attention here, where they say, they got an honest dealer, really perking Hank's interest as this blue meth is really his Moby Dick, to use an analogy here. It's his white whale. He'll be forever chasing this blue meth over the course of this series until his ultimate demise at the hands of Jack Welker. But yes, we can see him perk up, saying, "Of course, I want to meet this dealer. This is one of the biggest breaks we've gotten in this Heisenberg blue meth case. This is the first dealer that APD has ever stumbled upon in Brandon Mayhew." So a great progress and continuation of the story here. So much depth in respect to presenting us Hank's character. And great scene here through and through, which of course continues and progresses the story in this unbelievable episode. At Lizzie J, that's a good point. That's a good point. That you would imagine it's definitely possible. Again, we don't know. I'm just sort of extrapolating and putting my own spin. We at the end of the day, we don't know. It's impossible to know what's going on in Steve Gomez's mind. But that's a good point you raised at Lizzie J for sure. But of course, we then see a continuation of the cold opening scene way down the line here. Over almost 20 minutes into this episode, following us first being introduced to this story. But great back and forth here. More of the comedic humor being interjected. And again, I cannot, there's no way in the world I can just repeat this scene and do it any justice as a result and really display and exemplify all of the little comedic intricacies that are in the scene. It's so much. You just have to go back and watch it. It can't be done. But again, I always repeat myself here, but I don't want to, I love getting down in the nitty gritty of things and the little tiny details. And I could literally spend 2 hours on Saul Goodman's suit in this scene, I feel. But unfortunately, I feel like if I did that, I wouldn't be able to, wouldn't get anywhere here. But in order to, I don't want to get bogged down in all the little details here in the scene, but the overarching premise that's happening here in this scene is that this police officer wants Brandon to inform on who, basically him to be a rat on who his boss is, and who is this heavy hitter Heisenberg. That's what he wants to do here. Cutting out all of the hilarious comedy that's interjected in this scene as well. But of course, this back and forth between this undercover cop and Brandon Mayhew is immediately interrupted by the very first on-screen appearance of Saul Goodman, not in a commercial. And we see Saul Goodman enter this office right here. And oh my God, this is such a tangent. I don't even know if I want to go down here, but it is kind of funny. Like, this actually wasn't the very first time that Better Call Saul was ever mentioned in this Breaking Bad universe. There's actually a little bit of an Easter egg that people may know about. I don't know if I want to go and play it right now. I could go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but if you go back and rewatch the very first episode of season 2 of Breaking Bad, entitled 737, when Walt is flipping through the television channels, following the events that transpire in the junkyard with Tuco and Nodos and Gonzo, while he's going through and flipping the channels, and you hear the white noise. Overlaid in that white noise is Walt flipping, and one of the commercials is a commercial for Saul Goodman. It's very subtle. It's really hard to hear, but it's absolutely there. It's kind of an Easter egg. I don't know if people want me to go play it right now. It's a little bit of a, go down the tangent. All right, Kate Valentine. All right, I'll do it. Again, I have to pull it up real quick. I don't want to get a copyright. I don't want to get copy striked right here. But yes, I will absolutely get into this scene. But very quickly, I just want to play this scene from 737 very quickly, and to go off on a sub-tangent of the initial tangent. Like I talked about, we also see a shot of Ted Beneke here in this scene, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But during the scene when Walter White is going through and I turned myself off, and is flipping the channels. I have to cover up with my big ugly face here. There's a great piece of dialogue here, if you can hear it. But there's a great little Easter egg here where we can hear Better Call Saul in the background. So it's one of the commercials that Walt is flipping to. So let's see if we can hear it.
Walt.
There it is. I mean, it was right there, but here I'll.
Walt?
It's hard to hear. Here we go.
Didn't you hear me?
There it is. Did you hear that? I mean, it's not really nothing. I mean, it's a little bit of an Easter egg, but yeah, it's one of the commercials that Walt is flipping to is a Saul Goodman commercial where you can hear someone in on the TV from Walter White's perspective say "Better Call Saul." So yeah, that's just a little bit of the Easter egg there. I don't know. I always wondered what was the. I always thought there was another. There was a. That this wasn't technically the very first time we ever knew about Saul Goodman. It's a very very subtle Easter egg, but yeah, definitely a you heard it. Oh, that's good at Justin Cruz. So yeah, a little bit of a tangent there, but yes, back into the meat and potatoes here, back into the tomahawk ribeye, if you will. We finally get to see Saul Goodman enter the fold here, and we get to see all of his comedic nature just on full display here in this scene. And again, I don't want to repeat the dialogue. We all know just the unbelievable scenes here. I mean, people are writing them in the chat as well. The go grab the juice box. Just great, unbelievable dialogue back and forth here. So much hilarious comedic humor. And as I discussed when talking about season 6 of Better Call Saul, the juxtaposition of this character that was clearly written into the story for plot development reasons, because as Jesse will say later down the line, when you grow the business as you're doing, there's no way in the world that people are not going to get busted. By definition, Walter White was eventually going to have to get a lawyer because his guys were going to get busted. And it makes a ton of sense that not only was he going to get a criminal lawyer, but he was going to get a criminal lawyer, as Jesse Pinkman will say in the next scene. But yes, of course, in respect to the necessity of his character from a literary storytelling perspective, as this episode fully exemplifies, and again, the juxtaposition and the contrast of his just unbelievably dark backstory as being the protagonist as Jimmy McGill in Better Call Saul, it's so much just comedic humor interjected here by this character. It's so obvious to cut through the dark nature of the plot. I've said it again and again when watching Breaking Bad. That was the premise of Saul Goodman's character. I mean, Bob Odenkirk is a comedic actor. I mean, he's a stand-up comedian by trade. He had his unbelievable sketch comedy show, Mr. Show. So just an unbelievable character to be interjected here into this season and into this episode right here, and definitely needed it for sure. And I mean, who in the world could have ever known just the intricate backstory of this character right here? Like, that's immediately where my mind went to when I saw the very first commercial of him at the very beginning of this episode during the very first act. And yeah, I mean, my God, so many great dialogues. I mean, 5 fingers, no waiting. I mean, yes, I mean. The public masturbation. I've seen that scene 20 times. I laughed again. It just absolutely hilarious that this sort of the transpositional error here, just unbelievably hilarious. The back and forth rapport and the dialogue here that's happening between Saul and Badger here in this scene. It's absolutely hilarious. But at the same time, of course, my mind immediately goes to a Better Call Saul and to all of the backstory that we as the audience watching this in hindsight know about now with the benefit of retrospection of just everything this character went through. His backstory with Kim, his backstory with his brother-in-law Charles McGill, his everything that he did with Mike Ehrmantraut over the course of Better Call Saul. It just so much depth and complexity. And I mean, I know I've said this again and again when talking about Better Call Saul Season 6, but there was just, I would have never believed you in a million years had you told me just how this person who just looked like this two-dimensional, crass, vulgar lawyer who, yes, while was very crass and was, we revealed to us was this criminal lawyer, but at the same time was very good at his job and was very savvy and knew the legal system very well. I would have never guessed that this would have been such a complex, just emotionally complex character with all this emotional backstory, and it is kind of crazy to think. And again, I'll get to that a little bit down the end of the line when Saul eventually walks into Walter White's office at the end of this episode. But just thinking about the sort of the reasoning behind all of Saul's decisions here as well in this episode was extremely was a place my mind went to, of course, when watching this as well. And forever incorporating the Better Call Saul backstory. But yes, of course, at the same time, we also got the Ice Station Zebra reference as well. And of course, that's the film that he's watching with Kim Wexler in season 2 of Better Call Saul, immediately prior to him giving that phone call from Clifford, Maine. And again, there was, while we don't know the chain of command by which that was created, we can definitely extrapolate and sort of surmise the backstory of all of that. I've heard the very articulate examples of and the very emotionally deep examples of Saul naming this loan out after the film he was watching with his then girlfriend during a very sort of during the day of wine and roses, in this moment of bliss, sort of always hearkening back to a better time in his life. That's what he named the loan out after. But of course, I mean, that's the sort of more emotional decision behind it. But who knows? It could have been more shallow than that. Again, we'll never know. It will forever be up to the interpretation of the audience. As is that a huge inflatable Statue of Liberty that we initially saw with the Kettlemans. We'll never know the chain of command by which Saul got that. Did he get it from the Kettlemans? Did he buy a new one all in and of its own? We'll never know. Like I said, we'll never know what happens between 05 and 08. With the benefit of hindsight, that wasn't the point of Better Call Saul. It was the story of Jimmy and Kim. That was the story of Better Call Saul. And what we saw was just what happened to be going on in the background at the exact same time. And when that relationship was severed, we definitely didn't get to see what happened when the relationship was severed. And we only got to see the background of what was happening when the relationship rekindled again following the episode entitled Nippy, when Kim came back into the fold, in the episode entitled Waterworks, as well as Breaking Bad. So yeah, it's the we'll never know all of the sort of intricate backstories here. Again, I could spend another 2 hours just going down on that tangent. That was sort of one of the things I was thinking about when I was about to talk about this episode. Was it's so true. There's so much here. This episode there's so much overlap in terms of the Better Call Saul overlap here, where there's so much additional information and there's so many additional tangents and things to speculate on. I really feel like I could just go on forever and ever and ever with this episode. But yeah, there's just so much here, and trying to get back into the story that's happening right here and right now. Like I said, we learned that despite Saul being this very crass, vulgar lawyer, despite all of that, as he says to Brandon here, son, I promise you this, I will give you the best legal defense money can buy. And that is absolutely true what Saul is telling him here. That, yes, I may be vulgar, and yes, I may be a bit brash and brazen, but I am a savvy lawyer, and I know the legal system like the back of my hand, and I know all the intricacies, and I know all of the loopholes, and I literally will give you the best defense money can buy, which is very reassuring to Badger here in the moment in this scene. And like I said, I mean, it's so there's the very first time you're watching this scene, as I said, there's no way to know all of the backstory. But as I was rewatching this scene for the 20th time, it's just all of the backstory of Better Call Saul. There was so much going in my mind. My mind was going a million miles a minute about what about this, what about that. There's so much to sort of peel back and analyze, and that's sort of the way my mind works. And like I said, I could get bogged down in this scene here for hours. I mean, there's so much here in this scene. But yeah, a great continuation of the story. Again, at the moment in time, we didn't know just how complex this hilarious lawyer was, and how complex his backstory was in the moment. But yeah, a great piece of foreshadowing for Saul eventually meeting Walter White in this next scene here in this unbelievable episode. Of course, prior to that, I almost forgot, we also see this interaction here with Saul and Hank in this scene. We see him calling Francesca for the first time, a little bit of throwaway dialogue, if you will, with him taking the vitamin A. And of course, following this, he then approaches Hank and Steve Gomez and this detective here, clearly knowing that he's talking about his clients. Hilarious comedic interjection by Saul Goodman aside here. We can definitely see the gears turning here when Saul says to him, DEA for a street bus. Now, what would those two feds want with that little twerp? And again, while initially, you just think that Saul is doing this because he's a criminal lawyer and the sort of desire is to just make money. As I will talk about later down the line during the very last scene in this episode, it's much more complex than that as a result of the backstory that happens with him and Kim Wexler over the course of Better Call Saul. But yes, continuing the story here, more comedy interjected by, really two, again, it is kind of a great scene here, the very first iteration of Hank and Saul Goodman, where these two characters were truly the sort of comedic, more lighthearted characters initially here in this episode. And we're really seeing these sort of two comedic forces coming together here in this scene. So yeah, it's just a great scene through and through here, and really sort of continuing to set up the story in the moment here that's happening with Walt and Jesse here in this episode. But yes, here then following this, of course, great shot here of the inflatable Statue of Liberty. And as Jesse is saying here in the scene, again, I don't want to repeat a lot of things and a lot of the themes that I've already spoke on here. But as Jesse said here, you wonder your exponential growth, guys are going to get busted. And while that's a very rational and lucid sort of take here, and it's clearly true that, like I said, when you grow like this, you're going to get busted. At the same time, my mind really goes forever. Anytime I see Walt and Jesse really in over their head here, I really just go back to that dialogue that Saul Goodman and Jimmy McGill said in court in the episode entitled Saul Gone, where if it wasn't for me, Walter White would have been in jail or dead within a month. And additionally, during that scene that we see when Mike meets with Saul immediately prior to him visiting him at JP Wynn High School, Mike has the exact same take where these guys are amateurs and these guys don't know what they're doing and these guys are loose cannons. If you get involved with them, you're getting involved with people who are going to end up dead or in prison. These guys are bad news. They don't know what they're doing. And it's so true. I mean, just the actions here of these two characters here in this scene and in this episode, it really just screams of just amateurs who are just so in over their head. And even despite Walter White's just unbelievable intelligence and his just, his an unbelievable sort of book smart intelligence, he clearly lacks the street smarts, if you will. And I guess that's sort of the yin and the yang here with Walt and Jesse, with Walt having the sort of book smarts and Jesse having the street smarts. But even Jesse is not as well versed in this business as he needs to be, and is clearly going off half cocked and is clearly under the influence of methamphetamine all the time. So this is clearly a not the most efficient operation that's happening here between these two characters. But yes, following Jesse saying, providing more information that not only is Saul a criminal lawyer, he is a criminal lawyer. Of course, them initially thinking, all right, this is just Brandon's first rap. He will plead him out. He'll just do a couple of months. And I was sort of thinking about that in the moment. I mean, I feel like felony distribution, possession with intent to distribute of a Schedule II substance, I would imagine you're going to go to jail for more than a few months, as Saul Goodman said. I imagine that could be years in prison for Brandon. So again, I really feel like they both really don't know what they're talking about here in this scene, just based on their lack of knowledge in the this very illicit world that they both find themselves fully immersed in. But of course, following all of again, this is a great scene. I can't repeat all the dialogue. You just got to go back and watch it. But of course, with neither of them wanting to go in, they once again flip a coin on it, as they did in the episode entitled "And the Cat's in the Bag." And yes, dudes like Houdini at T. And again, I completely glossed over that other piece of dialogue, which I have made many videos about in the past, where the whole Emilio storyline ties in this episode, which we know from the plot of Better Call Saul. The whole Spooge storyline ties in from the plot of Better Call Saul. Of course, that's way sort of off on another tangent and doesn't really affect this episode here in the moment. And of course, I've made plenty of videos on that in the past. You can definitely go back and watch those if you want. But of course, in the moment here, they flip the coin as they did in respect to who was going to chemically disincorporate Emilio's body and who was going to kill Crazy Eight. And Walt comes out on the short end of the stick here. And again, we then see this hilarious juxtaposition of him going in Saul Goodman's office here. We get to see Francesca behind the glass. And again, another tangent I could go off on, where we saw initially in the plot of Better Call Saul, when Francesca first started working for Saul Goodman, she had a more traditional office that was very open. But of course, following all of the coughing and all of the riffraff that was in there and the people who were smoking and putting their cigarettes out on the furniture, she then quickly realized, as we saw later down the line during the flash forward in the episode entitled Fun and Games, that she wanted to be behind a big wall of glass, forever separated from the clientele. And her very her very, positive, upbeat demeanor has clearly worn off at this moment in time, as it also did much earlier in the year 2005. This is way down the line, the year 2008. But it's another tangent I could definitely go off on in respect to the office of Saul Goodman. And when Kim first walked into Saul's office and that waiting room was done up in the way it was, I definitely did not expect that at all. But with the benefit of hindsight, it absolutely makes sense in respect to the character transformation of Francesca here. At Sam Fisher for Francesca got out of the MVD out of MVD hell and is now in Saul hell. That is a great point. Again, there's with the incorporation of so many crucial characters from the plot of Better Call Saul, my mind could just go off on all these various tangents that are distantly removed from the story that's happening right here in the moment right now. But of course, again, these scenes, so many scenes through and through here where we see the continuation. We see the very first meeting between Mr. Mayhew and Saul Goodman right here in this scene. So much more comedic dialogue back and forth. Where my mind immediately goes, and again, I have to play this scene. I just have to. I'll cover it up. I'll cover most of it up. But I have to play this scene in respect to where my mind went when he was talking about his name here. But
Mayhew, is that Irish or English?
Irish.
Faith and Begorra, a fellow potato eater. My real name's McGill. Yeah, the Jew thing I just do for the homeboys. They all want a pipe-hitting member of the tribe, so to speak.
I mean, my goodness, there's so much there. There is so much there in that scene. I mean, just where my mind goes with the Better Call Saul backstory, with Saul being so cavalier with the name change, and with there being so much complexity to that short little anecdote that he told to Walter White there in that scene. It's just unbelievable to think about and ruminate on. And it is very true. I was going to sort of wait till a little bit later to talk about this, but it is kind of very funny in retrospect how this sort of facade that Saul is putting on here is truly emotional coping. That's what it is. It's clearly emotional coping, dealing from the fallout and the pain that he experienced following his divorce of Kim Wexler that happened in season 6 of Better Call Saul in the episode entitled Fun and Games. It was all emotional coping. It was all putting on this facade. It was clearly burying his emotions and not articulating his emotions, and truly just trying to not think about how miserable and upset he was in his life. And it, from the moment he woke up, as we saw in that flash forward scene in Fun and Games, from the moment he woke up, his mind was immediately turned on to Saul Goodman. He had his Bluetooth in. He immediately started doing talking to Francesca, getting his days sorted. Even in the shower, he just could never be alone with his thoughts. There always needed to be constant stimulation here, and him to not be constantly thinking about the fallout of what happened with Kim Wexler and what happened with the death of Howard Hamlin and all the backstory that happened with Lalo and with Mike. All of that just emotionally eating at him and just destroying him on the inside, likely, is why he was constantly forcing himself to be stimulated in this manner. And of course, I'll definitely get that into more of that in the very last scene that we see here in this episode. But irrespective of, again, oh my God, I'm not a psychotherapist, but I play one on television apparently. But irrespective of me trying to analyze the mind of a Saul Goodman, in the very moment here that's happening here in this scene, we learn that Brandon's going to get out in no time because now that the DEA is involved, he's looking at time served plus probation. This immediately strikes up an antenna and a red flag for a Walter White here in the scene where he says the DEA, realizing that they're onto him. Of course, Saul confiding in him that they're after this heavy hitter that goes by the name Heisenberg. They want this guy like the axe wants the turkey. And again, I don't want to get bogged in the details here in the scene, but the back and forth happening here of Walt clearly not wanting his employee, if you will, to inform on himself in this scene is clearly displayed to us. Again, there's so many great pieces of dialogue here in the scene. I can't repeat it all. I mean, I could repeat it all, but I really feel like it would serve no purpose when you could just go back and watch it. But just a great sort of back and forth dynamic here. We learn so much. There's so much that happened. There's so much that's happening here. And that's something where that's a place my mind went to all the time, where I just said, there's so much here in this episode that I found myself thinking about. In this scene right here, another very crucial piece of dialogue that happens here in this scene is that we not only does the audience learn that Saul is very aware of this Heisenberg legend and persona that's out there in Albuquerque, but on top of that, we also learn that this bravado and this persona that Jesse Pinkman has built up is also apparently going to begin to come crashing down I mean, my God, there's so many great pieces of dialogue here, but because Walt says to him after he says that you have to take this deal because the other option is no option at all. Your nephew is going to spend years in prison, having a not very good time, to put it in a more G-rated sense. But of course, Walt continuing to say, we can't take this deal. What about reprisals? I heard that these are vicious, desperate people. I've heard one of them killed another man by crushing his head with an ATM machine. Saul then, of course, laughs and says people love to take credit for the good ones. The guy who got his head smushed used to be a client of mine. His wife killed him. It was open and shut. And again, there's so much happening there. Again, we learn the backstory of Spooge and how, which is also presented to us in season 6 of Better Call Saul in the episode entitled Hit and Run during that very brief scene. Much akin to his connection to Emilio, which was also presented in this scene and very intentionally, likely so by the creators. We never got to see the conversation that happened there, only the backstory and the fact that it existed. But again, that sort of ace up the sleeve that Walt and Jesse have of Jesse being this ruthless killer is now going to come crashing down, and eventually will later down the line, where all over town they're going to know that Jesse didn't kill the guy, his junkie wife copped to it, and it's going to make Jesse look even worse for lying. But of course, following him continuing to prod, saying no talking to the DEA, Saul continuing to say, like, you're crazy, what are you doing? The only thing that's stopping this, like, are you talking to him? Who's been talking to him? The only thing stopping the deal from happening is that Brandon is saying that these people are going to kill me. Again, Saul definitely prodding and saying, you're crazy. He is not going to last in prison. You have to take his plea deal. He has to take his chances on the outside. I'll work in some witness protection potentially. And there's so much happening here. I mean, it's further displaying to us Saul's competence as a lawyer and his savviness, and him just being a very intelligent lawyer, despite the fact that he is in no way a morally upstanding member of the New Mexico Bar Association. There's so much happening here in this scene. And of course, despite all of Walter White's prodding, Saul basically saying, all is right in the world. I'm going to get your nephew singing like a canary. The ace up the sleeve, I mean, the great scene that happens here when Saul opens the door. Again, I think I missed it there. But yes, the scene where he opens the door and Saul says, and then Walt says to him $10,000 and he proceeds to close it. I mean, such a powerful scene here where we again, I'm using all of the benefit of hindsight here, where we don't know just in the moment during the very first watch just how much of a criminal lawyer Saul Goodman is. But this scene here really just puts the rubber stamp on it of Jesse Pinkman saying you want a criminal lawyer. Just such a powerful scene here when Saul closes that door. I mean, such a powerful scene when he just stops in his tracks and closes that door. And of course, him definitely just really, I mean, when he was offered that bribe, his sort of antenna really went up here. A lot of just thoughts percolating here in his head, really just trying to size up the scene and see what's happening here with Walter White, noticing the cough that's going to come into play later down the line in this episode. But Walt, of course, saying, I'm not saying to throw the case, just no talking with the DEA. Saul then, of course, saying, are you saying what I think you're saying? Walt doubling down, saying, yes, what's it going to be? And of course, this is immediately juxtaposed with Saul saying, not Saul, Walt talking to Jesse, and Jesse being taken aback by saying, that guy wouldn't take a bribe. Yes, Saul Goodman we're talking about. The great piece of dialogue with Walt saying, morally outraged, yes, at Sam Fisher, he said, threatened to call the police. I mean, just so much great dialogue here. I could just hang on it all day long. But of course, following this and them realizing, that Badger's gonna inform to the DEA, so what are we gonna do about it? And it is very true what Saul Goodman says down the line about how, why don't you just kill Brandon? How, again, where my mind goes to is just how in over their heads these two characters are here in this episode. But of course, following Jesse saying, what are we going to do about it? We then see this great scene here of Walter White kidnapping Saul and Jesse here in this scene. And it's actually kind of funny. I actually hadn't even really noticed this one photo here that was used as a promo photo for this episode. I used for the thumbnail of this video. But yeah, this photo right here, I mean, this is actually a different take of it. The one I have is slightly different. But yeah, this scene here appears to be Walt and Jesse waiting in the shadows to kidnap Saul. We can see Jesse holding the bag in his hand. If we can get the right there, if we can get the photo to show it here, it's clearly them waiting off in the distance. And if we go back to the shot here, it appears that right where I'm circling right here, they appear to be standing off here in the distance in the shadow. But I suppose this was definitely a sort of just promo photo that was taken here of the scene. I don't think there's no sort of deleted scene or anything to that effect. This is definitely sort of a it's a completely unique shot that we never got to see in this episode or in any sort of deleted scene. And it's a great I love this shot here. It's an alternate shot. The one I have in the thumbnail is slightly different. It may even, Walt's making a sort of a hand signal there. But yeah, it's definitely what was happening off screen here with with Jesse and Walt lurking in the shadows to kidnap Saul here, following him leaving work. But yes, of course, so much here. I'm going to get bogged down in all the details, but hilarious scene here with Saul and us exemplifying his personality here with what he says to Francesca. But of course, I don't want to play. I've gotten in trouble with playing too much. We've all seen it. He puts the hood over the head here, and they put the hood over the head here wearing the same mask they used to rob Southwest and Annalyn in the season 1 finale. And then Saul is then taken out to the desert. And yes, we've all seen this scene a million times. We all know the dialogue here in the scene. Of course, my mind definitely went to the scene here, if I can pull it up, that was interjected here in Better Call Saul, where we also see this the cold opening scene of the episode entitled Breaking Bad of season 6 of Better Call Saul, where we see the ride to the desert. I can't even talk right now. But yeah, that's again, I don't know how I don't know how many tangents I should go down here when discussing this episode, but yeah, that's Sam Fisher. Lalo is one, of course, but I feel like I've talked about this scene again and again. I feel like I'm almost repeating myself. I've talked about this in so many videos, but there's so much going on here. Yes, to the long of the short of it is that Saul's actions here in this scene are absolutely the way to explain them is that just based on everything that happened over the course of Better Call Saul, we know that Saul clearly didn't believe Mike completely when he told him that Lalo wasn't coming back, because he was told by Mike the first time that Lalo was dead, but after he was told that, Lalo came back into his apartment and killed Howard. So despite Saul being told the second time that Lalo was not coming back, unbeknownst to him but known to the audience that Lalo was dead, it clearly makes sense that Saul then thinks, oh my goodness, Lalo, after all these years, emerged from the dead once again. Way down the line in 2005, after he came in 2004, 4 years later, he emerged from the dead and kidnapped me again. Siempre soy amigo del cartel. Lalo didn't send you no Lalo. I've talked about this scene again and again and again. Just extrapolating and thinking about all the events that happened in Saul Goodman's life that are leading to him acting in the manner that he does. This is just an unbelievable scene here. And yeah, it's actually, they talk about this scene a lot in the Insider podcast. They don't really talk about the sort of thematic storytelling aspect of this scene as much. They definitely get into the more filming production of the scene. It was pretty crazy. Apparently it was freezing during this scene here. And the wind really was whipping like that. Apparently it wasn't a wind machine. So yeah, very, very ominous. And I guess while it was probably very difficult to film, it was just like, this is just such an artistically beautiful scene here. At the low light, a lot of it was filmed during I believe it's called the golden hours, Peter Gould would call it, of just when the sun is about to set, and there's still a little bit of light left, but it's also filmed in the dark here. But yeah, just so much great things happening in this scene, so many Better Call Saul callbacks. But again, I feel like I'm going off on a lot of tangents that don't impact the story right here in the moment. But again, we learn that Walt and Jesse are basically kidnapping Saul and saying no deals with the DEA. Brandon Mayhew won't identify anybody. And of course, Saul says, why don't you just kill Badger? And of course, Walt and Jesse look at one another, and it's so true where he says, mosquitoes flying around bite you in the ass. You don't go gunning for the mosquito's attorney. You go and grab a fly swatter. Do I have to spell this out for you? And of course, It is very true. It would have been a much easier, very linear trajectory to somehow shank a badger, but of course, I don't know if they. I guess they theoretically could prison shank that badger theoretically, but of course Jesse is very emotionally attached to his friend right here and would not want to kill him. That's for sure. But yeah, just a more of a further exemplification of just how in over their heads these two characters are. Great scene, great callback here of the put the dollar in my pocket, which is a direct callback to a Better Call Saul with the benefit of hindsight to make it official. And of course, following him saying, you guys are officially represented by Saul Goodman and Associates. I mean, there's a great shot here. I mean, I definitely I don't want to. I'm gonna turn off the display, the video of this one real quick. God, there's a great shot.
Take the ski mask.
I'm trying to. Yeah, agree. Right here. There's a great shot here of when he asked this the question. Yeah, in respect, at Stone Yoda, in respect to the shanking.
Remember that? Okay, so if a prison shanking is completely off the table, and we're sure of that,
which of course would be the most linear trajectory here, as Saul Goodman is saying. But this look that, my goodness, this look that Walt gives here in this scene. I mean, my goodness, if a picture said 1,000 words, that look on Walter White's face. And while it's a pretty hilarious scene where he's sort of realizing like this would kind of solve all of our problems, dead men tell no tales, it also, despite being such a hilarious sort of view into the mind of Walter White, at the same time, it is a very dark scene where before, when Jesse initially brings up the fact that they have to kill Tuco because it's either him or us, and Walt says, no, we're not going down that road. And of course, earlier in the previous season, he says, no more bloodshed. This look on Walter White's face is just thinking, this, from a logical, rational point of view, as messed up and twisted as it is, this is the most simple trajectory to solving all of our problems, and how Walt has come so far in his character development that it is absolutely a possibility for his character right here in the moment. So yeah, it's a really sort of funny but very dark scene that happens here when just thinking about what's going on in the mind of Walter White. And of course, following Saul basically saying, all right, if we're not going to do the most simplest form of action here, the way I see it, someone's going to prison. It's just a matter of who, really sort of leaving that cliffhanger out in the open here prior to the scene cutting to black. And of course, following this, we then see Brandon clearly going along with the plan. As Hank says, lame brain, late night TV ads aside, your lawyer cooked you up a pretty good deal here. Time served with no probation, even better than what Saul Goodman said about probation. It's then revealed to us, all comedic aspects that are interjected in this scene aside, that Brandon is willfully going to inform on what the feds believe is Heisenberg here. And of course, while we initially hear him describe Heisenberg as someone who could fit the description of Walter White, of someone between 50 and 70, average regular height, when Hank says what kind of hair he has, he says no hair, the dude's bulger than you. Very briefly, I mean, in the moment you're wondering, is Brandon really going to inform on Heisenberg? But of course, it's a clear bait and switch here, where we quickly learn that he's going to inform he's going to inform on someone who is not actually Heisenberg. And again, before we get into that, I mean, there is also the whole sort of backstory that happens. I mean, I feel like I can talk about this more during the very final scene in respect to the scene in the RV that happens. The scene in the RV that happens in Better Call Saul during this episode, which we didn't get to see in this episode. I feel like that more kind of ties into the very final scene in this episode. But yes, getting into more of the story right here and right now, we see this sort of very interesting plan where they find this man, Jimmy In and Out, who has this service where he will go to prison for you. Of course, we never got to see the genesis by which Saul was able to establish this connection, and it was actually very well done in the plot of Better Call Saul. I talked about it, how they used the literary vessel of the Black Book in order to very broadly, with a broad brush, explain how Saul could acquire a large quantity of contacts, because there's so many characters who Saul knows. To really, with the benefit of hindsight, in 13 episodes in season 6, to really display every single backstory of how he met every single character would have taken way too much time. So it was a very clever literary vessel by which it was able to establish all these people that Saul knew, whether it was Lawson or Kubi or Huel or even Jimmy In and Out. Theoretically, he could have been in that black book. We'll never know. I know someone decoded it on Reddit, officially, unofficially. But yeah, again, we'll never know. He likely learned about him at some point in time between 05 and 08, but maybe he established this connection right here in the moment right now. But in the moment, what's happening right here is that Jimmy is going to take the hit for Heisenberg. He's going to go down. And of course, he's going to go to prison for them because he's more comfortable in prison than on the outside. And all it's going to cost them is $80,000 and a pound of their finest meth. Again, further displaying the fact that they need this clear line and clear source of income to go away in order to progress the story, and for order for Heisenberg to continue his character development, for him to get to a place where eventually when he runs into $5 million, he's going to turn it down. But yes, it's a great scene here where again when they finally agree to do this plan, because there's really no way out of it. You know, as Saul says, if this option is too expensive, there's always shanking Badger in the chow line. And of course, as he says, you did bring the money, didn't you? They pour the money on the table, and man, what a powerful piece of dialogue that he says to Walt and Jesse here in the scene when he says, conscience gets expensive, doesn't it? And it's so true. I mean, he absolutely could have continued to try to pay off. I guess, I mean, it wouldn't really have been possible to pay off all of Mike's men and gliding overall after Mike's death, but it is true. Conscience does get expensive, and the fact that, I mean, maybe Walt would have done it. He didn't have such an emotional attachment to Badger, and maybe he was sort of not as emotionally and morally upstanding as Jesse Pinkman, for whatever that's worth. But it's a very powerful piece of dialogue with the when he says a conscience gets expensive, doesn't it? And it's very true. And eventually, Walt will not go down this line of paying off people to solve his problems. I mean, at the same time, he's going to pay a lot of money to kill all those people in prison. But it's not an apples to apples, 1-to-1 comparison. But it is a very powerful piece of dialogue that Saul says here in the scene. I definitely agree with that for sure. And yes, the amount of foreshadowing here at Haggard Hot Rods is it's pretty crazy. So. But of course, following this, I mean, a great scene through and through. Again, I don't want to get bogged down in all the details here because I kind of want to focus more on sort of Saul's final actions here in this episode. But great scene here. A lot of comedy interjected where we see the deal finally go down. Where, of course, there's a case of mistaken identity, almost 1,000,000 to 1. Maybe not 1,000,000 to 1, but it seems like 1,000,000 to 1 happenstance where another bald man walks on the bench that James Edward Kilkelly is supposed to be on. Thus confusing Badger because Badger doesn't know what he looks like. And of course, we sort of see a little bit of a Marx Brothers-esque routine, if you will, sort of ensue here where they have to somehow get Badger's attention despite the fact that they're currently being filmed by the Albuquerque Police Department and the DEA. You would imagine that there are other vans there, though, I suppose. I mean, I don't want to sort of get into the sort of plot hole debate here, but again, it's a great scene, a pretty hilarious scene. I don't want to say it. It comes across maybe in the moment as a little bit implausible, but at the same time, I mean, in the moment, maybe it seemed a little bit hokey, but I really don't think it is, because it is kind of crazy how, at the end of the day, the scene of Walt talking with Hank really ties into this scene here, which gives sort of Walt that plausible, not plausible deniability, but the plausible, rationale to go see Hank and be very positive and upbeat with him. So yeah, despite the fact that it seems like in the moment this couldn't work, this is almost crazy. I don't find it as hokey as I maybe initially thought it was the very first time I watched it. But of course, great scene here where Walt hooks that aggressive U-turn where his back tires even lift off the ground, and him basically saying driving to the other intersection, telling Jesse to go out and stall him or get his attention. And Jesse saying, "How in the world are you going to do that? They're watching. I'll think of something." And of course, following this, breaking ball exactly at T. But of course, following this, we then see the entire story really tie together, where we see Walt drive up to Hank Schrader and say, "Hank, I thought that was you," and give Walt plausible deniability to completely block the shot, where Jesse's able to walk behind the camera and to get Badger's attention to go to the other bench. And it is kind of funny where it is true. I mean, in the moment, the reason why I feel like I incorrectly thought it was kind of unbelievable in the moment is because we as the audience just know how this is Heisenberg and how this is a completely that this is an action that completely benefits Walter White in his illicit activities. But we have to remember the scene from Hank Schrader's point of view. He's so in the moment, and said Sam Fisher, Walt not now working. He's so in the moment and myopically focused on the task at hand, and he in no way even remotely respects, what's the word I'm looking for? He remotely, I'm blanking on the word. Oh my God, I'm blanking on the word. He in no way remotely believes. He in no way remotely believes that Walter White is in any way involved in all of this. It's not even close to being on his radar. He just thinks his sort of, howdy-doody, leave it to Beaver, Mr. Chip's brother-in-law is being sort of oblivious here and saying hi to Hank after our last conversation. "Hey, how you doing? Are you doing better after our last conversation?" In the moment to Hank, it's very believable here. So again, it is kind of funny how they interject that sort of lighthearted music here in this scene. There's a lot of comedy here, and we can just see how over the top Walter White is appearing to sort of come across here, and his personality just seems so different from the Walter White we know, but he's doing a very good acting job here of putting on this sort of fake persona for his brother-in-law, and his brother-in-law so does not does not expect Walt to be in any way involved in this world, that it's absolutely believable here. And it's a great scene through and through where the plan ends up working. Jesse gets his attention, the deal goes down, and they arrest James Edward Kilkelly, and he drops to his knees pretty quickly here. And again, I kind of want to see I want to see how far away. I guess the vans were out of the shot here. I always make the mistake. The vans were definitely out of the shot here. Yeah, they were way out of the shot. I guess it makes sense then how they weren't looking for. They wouldn't have seen Jesse walk behind Badger here in the scene. But James Edward Kilkelly gives himself without a fight. Heisenberg allegedly gives himself up without a fight here, and the plan works. Jesse even saying, "I think they bought it." The DEA clearly, not the DEA, the Albuquerque APD clearly thinking that he bought it here, saying it was a solid bust. Textbook bust. We got a pound of blue stuff. Heisenberg's real name is James Kilkelly, but of course, a great sort of close-up shot here of this actor. But of course, following this, we of course see the gears sort of turning in Hank Schrader's head. Again, I've tried to do this again and again over the course of this retrospective, trying to extrapolate and think about the thoughts that are going through a character's head, which is absolutely impossible. There's no way, picture says 1,000 words. There's no way in the world of knowing what's going on in Hank Schrader's head, but clearly an appropriate amount of suspicion here of just how easy this seemingly was and how improbable this was, how we got our man, it's over. It almost seems too good to be true, and as the saying goes, if it is too good to be true, it sometimes is, or it always is, or it is. So yeah, if a picture says 1,000 words here, and definitely down the line in this season, following the deal that happens with Gus Fring, where he basically says how Heisenberg has gone regional, how he dismisses how the belief that APD has their man. We can definitely see the gears turning here in Hank Schrader's head. And again, I could spend another 2 hours just thinking about what possibly could be going through James Edward Kilkelly's mind. What could be going through Hank Schrader's mind here? I was distracted by the chat here in this scene, but yeah. The picture says 1,000 words, as I said. Clearly a appropriate amount of suspicion here for Hank Schrader. And of course, following this and prior to the very last final scene, which just ties an unbelievable bow and really just foreshadows and and it brings so much anticipation to the rest of the season, and also provides us with just a great amount of retrospection. We then see the story go back to the story of Jane and Jesse, where Jane allows herself into Jesse's apartment to allow the delivery of this bed. We can see the tension here. We can see in my humble opinion, the sexual tension in this scene is pretty apparent and obvious. When the bed goes down, the small talk is immediately interrupted, and I guess the point of this scene is to further display to us the kindling of this romance between these two young characters who are beautiful and in love, and also displaying to us that this was just not a one-off, one-night stand thing between these two characters, and definitely displaying to us that this is appears to be a full-fledged relationship for some point in time. But of course, as Vince Gilligan said in the Insider podcast I talked about a little bit earlier, it's as beautiful and romantic, and oh my goodness, two young, beautiful people in love. Isn't that just so beautiful? Nothing more beautiful than that. Nothing wrong with that, to paraphrase the Nutty Professor for any fans of that movie, that ridiculous movie. Pretty funny though. But despite how young and in love these two beautiful characters are, it really is. There's with the benefit of hindsight, the dark tragic undertones of this scene, of the moth to the flame here of Jane Margolis is really dark. That is for sure. So that's immediately where my mind went to here in this scene. So further displaying to us that this relationship is going to continue. It's going to continue on over the course of this season, and unfortunately for Jesse, this fleeting happiness is not going to last for him. Unfortunately, again, I don't want to paint Jesse as a complete victim here. He has a lot of this to blame. He has a lot to blame for himself in all of this, as was alluded to a little bit earlier. I don't want to jump ahead of myself too much here in this story, but yes, it is a lot of thoughts going on here in this scene. And of course, the final payoff, the big reveal here in this scene, with Saul Goodman entering Walter White's office at his high school at JP Wynn. And again, there's so much here, because not only do we have the backstory that was presented to us of the conversation that Mike and Saul had in his office in the flashback scene that happened, or flash forward depending on your perspective, in the episode entitled Breaking Bad, but we also have the deleted scene that happened when we learn that his PI tracked down Walter White and gave him the yearbook, and he found out he really was a high school chemistry teacher at JP Wynn High School, almost wanting to provide him with evidence after him almost maybe not even believing that this man is a if I can find the scene here. But yeah, I mean, great scene here where, as Mike said, this guy's an amateur, and we also see, the walk-up scene that happens as well prior to him entering at the very end of this episode. But yeah, I mean, in the end, again, I don't want to get bogged down in all of the back and forth here, where initially following Walter White's reservations of blackmail being dispelled, we then learn that Saul wants to essentially be a small and silent part of this venture, where you're onto something great. Anything that gets the DEA's panties this much in a bunch, to paraphrase that line of dialogue, you're onto something great, and I want to be a small and silent part of it. And of course, despite Walt, I mean, there's so much here. There's Walt's perspective of, yes, we can really see Walt as sort of, he definitely doesn't have any leverage here in this scene. He's really sort of in over his head, and despite his initial reservations of not wanting to involve any other entities in this operation, his back is really up against the wall here. There's nothing he can do. And despite him maybe not trusting this lawyer that much in the moment here, at the same time, he's going to need this lawyer. And unbeknownst to him, this is actually an extremely powerful, man, this chair creaks a lot. This is an extremely powerful contact for Walter White to have here for the rest of the story. I mean, despite the shallowness of Saul Goodman's character that was presented to us here in this scene, despite the apparent shallowness, there is so much just depth and complexity, and this is is an incredibly intelligent man in many respects, in a lot of respects. He knows the law very well. He has a lot of contacts. He is really a good criminal lawyer that is really going to get Walt out of a bind. For goodness sake, he's going to be the facilitator to introducing him to Gus Fring when all is said and done. Of course, the I know a guy who knows another guy, he who shall not be named, as he said in the episode entitled Breaking Bad in season 6 of Better Call Saul. But absolutely the way he closed this out. But yes, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, in respect to Saul Goodman's actions here over the course of this episode, where it's really interesting to think about the fact that this really was emotional coping when all is said and done. It really, all of these actions, all of his decision making here, despite it of course being a bad decision when all was said and done, much akin to the juxtaposition of him breaking into the Marks house in the same episode, when sort of him walking to JP Wynn High School was overlaid and paralleled with him breaking into the man's house, sort of juxtaposing two two bad decisions that ultimately lead to Saul Goodman's downfall. It's absolutely appears to be the case where Saul is just emotionally coping. He is just needs to be constantly stimulated in order to deal with the emotional fallout of Chuck and with Howard and with Kim. That is the story of Saul Goodman, at least in my interpretation of Better Call Saul as a series. That is what caused Saul to do everything he did over the course of Breaking Bad. It wasn't for this sort of shallow, it was sort of for shallow monetary gains, but it wasn't just for the money. It was more about the mental stimulation and just completely not dealing with his emotions. And in many ways, it makes sense. Could he have talked to a therapist about everything that happened? I don't know. Maybe. It's all his word against his. He's not going to talk about how I'm currently involved with a drug dealer. Again, I don't know about lawyer-client privilege and all of that. Or not lawyer-client privilege, like a therapist, a patient privilege and all of that. But that's neither here nor there. He didn't do any of that. In order for him to deal with his emotions, as is sort of a common theme in Breaking Bad, anything but what Howard Hamlin did is what most men do. Anything but talk therapy. And I am just emotionally wrecked and ravaged by the guilt I feel that I'll eventually come to terms with and absolve myself for and atone for in the finale of Better Call Saul, and eventually, go to prison for the rest of my life for. I am coping with all of that guilt by becoming this person. This is all phony. This is a persona that I'm putting on. The suit, the hair, the one-liners, the getting involved with manufacturing methamphetamine. It is true. I know people. It's true. You go down that spiral. You hear from even in my own experiences, I guess, when using various substances to deal with one's emotions. I don't do it anymore, but I feel like maybe there was a time, you drink to deal with your emotions, or you use any sort of substance to deal with your emotions. In that same sort of premise, that's exactly what Saul is doing. He is just using getting involved in the sort of Albuquerque criminal underworld to deal with his own emotions and the fallout of everything that happened. At Sam Fisher, Jimmy is truly a victim of his brother's hatred. That is another 3-hour tangent right there. I've definitely made some decisions, not decisions. I've definitely made some videos on that for sure. In respect to was Chuck right all along? If Chuck believed in him, would he have not turned out that way? Even if Chuck sort of believed in him and gave him the benefit of the doubt, would he eventually become this person in the end? The chicken and egg sort of dichotomy. But yeah, that's a long discussion for sure at Sam Fisher. But yeah, like I said, that pretty much ends this episode right here with Saul agreeing to become a silent and small and silent partner with Walter White. Not just to make money, but as a result of the emotional coping that he wants to deal with. And irrespective of all of Mike Ehrmantraut's reservations that happen here in this scene in the episode entitled Breaking Bad in season 6 of Better Call Saul, despite all of that warning, despite all of his sort of intuition, I guess the desire of him to emotionally cope with his distress made him walk into JP Wynn High School. And again, I could go off on tangents forever and ever and ever. That scene with Mike Ehrmantraut and Saul, where he even says, "Is that what you say, or is that what he who shall not be named says?" It's definitely something I will get into. I believe in the episode entitled Mandela, when Walt initially first meets Gus Fring. That's definitely going to be a crucial component of that story, which I will definitely incorporate in my retrospective of that episode. But yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, this is the conversation happening right now in respect to the causes of the universe, the chicken and the egg, to put it the most simply. But yeah, I mean, that was quite the episode there. I mean, there's so much there. I mean, I even feel like I've left. I mean, despite everything I've said about that, I even felt like I've left out a few things. I mean, even that one piece of dialogue that Walt says to Jesse about how there's are you, like, when Jesse says to him, "Are you sure this guy's for real? I mean, who wants to go to prison on purpose?" And when Walt says to him, there's more than one kind of prison, and Jesse says, "What the heck does that even mean?" And of course, my mind immediately went to the place where the scene of Saul working in the Cinnabon was almost like a mental prison, if you will. Again, I think maybe that, again, I don't know if it's a one-to-one comparison. It's a very profound, metaphorical, philosophical statement by Walter White, for sure. There's more than one type of prison that he says. Definitely, I hearken back to the prison that Saul Goodman is clearly living in now, the prison that he's going to live in Omaha, Nebraska, and the prison he's going to eventually live and die in, and barring clemency or early release for some reason, as I talked about in a previous video in ADX Montrose. It's a very powerful scene, and there's so much here. Again, people getting into the discussion of Charles McGill and Saul as well. That's a whole nother component of the story. But again, I mean, there's so much here, and there's so much to talk about, and the story will definitely come more into the fold as Saul is more of him is displayed to us over the course of Breaking Bad. And yeah, this was a great episode. It was just an unbelievable watch. Like I said, a much more lighthearted episode compared to an episode like Peekaboo. Definitely a much more fun episode to rewatch and talk about for sure. And yeah, I never get sick of watching or talking about this show. But yeah, this was a great introduction to Saul Goodman's character. I can never see this episode or never really watch Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad the same way ever again. The one-liners, I mean, it's not as funny as it used to be. I mean, by definition, I'm not. That's not a critique or anything. But by definition, when you make his backstory so much more compelling and so much more dark and emotional, and you realize, hey, he's basically just emotional coping here for all the distress in his life. It's the humor is while the humor is there in the moment, when you sort of get back and think about it a little bit more, it's a pretty sort of dark premise that we see here. But yes, through and through, unbelievable episode. I feel like I could literally talk about it again and again and again. I could go on for, I feel like, another 2 hours about this episode here. There's so much more. I feel like, despite everything I said, I feel like I even may have left some things out. But yeah, it's I really enjoyed talking about this episode here. I really enjoyed everybody for tuning in tonight. I'm probably gonna have to end it here. Really appreciate all of the conversation in the chat. Really appreciate all the super chats. I really appreciate all the support. In the future, like I said, I'll definitely try to do one of these a week. That is the goal of mine for sure. Friday's kind of working for me right now. I'll probably do this next Friday as well, hopefully. I mean, great episode after this. I mean, 4 days out. My goodness gracious, another great episode. By definition, a little bit more lighthearted as well, despite all the very emotional sentiments that happen in that episode as well, following the battery dying. But yeah, it was it was one of my favorites, and yeah, 4 days out is going to be great. For anyone still here, that is the plan, to go live next Friday and talk about it. If you're still here and enjoy the stream, I would appreciate the thumbs up. It does, I do appreciate it. It does really help. And yes, for anyone out there in the U.S., I hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday night. And yes, I will, like I said, I'll definitely be live next Friday. That is the plan, to talk about the next iteration of this episode. And yes, I will be definitely looking forward to that. Really appreciate everyone for tuning in. Thank you again so much for all the support, all the super chats, all the chat. I love learning from the chat. I really do learn a lot every single time I interact with the chat. I love talking about the show, and I will see you guys around. Have a great rest of your weekend. Take it easy.